Hi, good morning, everyone. So we are just going to begin. So if you could take a seat, that would be great. Good morning, everyone. So welcome to this session on improving access to finance for digital entrepreneurs in Africa. I believe this is among the most important issues for Africa to take full advantage of the evolving digital economy. This is what we heard for the last 3 days, actually, how important financing. People have ideas, people can work with whatever the connectivity they have, but the young entrepreneurs, the powering this region, were telling us it's the financing, it's the big constraint here. So my name is Shamika Siriman, and I am the director of the Division on Technology and Logistics of UNCTAD, and it is my division that puts this show. So this session, I would want to let you know that the session is broadcast live on the web, so I wish to bid welcome also to those of you who are following the discussion remotely. There are several of them are here. The session will also be simultaneously interpreted in French and English, so anyone who wishes to ask questions or make comments can do so in any of the 2 languages. So as I mentioned earlier, this session will focus on the need to facilitate a robust financial architecture here in Africa that can fund innovation and entrepreneurship at all points across the e-commerce value chain. In spite of progress, we also heard many places there's a lot of progress. Several African countries, however, do not provide reliable financial services or early-stage capital debt to startups and growth-oriented businesses in the e-commerce ecosystem. And to take the full advantage of digitalization, financing and other services are needed to support entrepreneurs seeking to develop innovative solutions and new business models. And that's what we heard for the last 3 days from the 700 plus private sector enterprises, entrepreneurs that were presented here, and some of you are already here. And we also heard that the digital entrepreneurs in Africa often struggle to get the same access to finance as their counterparts in other parts of the world, especially in Asia. We also work in other parts of the world, and we see that gap. So the concern is that this is going to increase the risk of widening divides in the digital economy. So that's why we are here. With this help of this very eminent group of experts, we will this morning do a few things. We will review the current status of access to finance for digital entrepreneurs for Africa, take stock, and with your help too, and look at existing barriers, especially with your help and with all of us here. Discuss the role of the financial sector, including banks and venture capital firms, and look at the potential role of various tech hubs and incubators. And we have some of them already here in the panel. They have an amazing experience of taking tech hubs and incubators forward. And finally, we will also discuss the most important policy measures that should be taken, both in individual countries and internationally, to improve the situation. We at UNCTAD we are an organization that does a lot of policy, and we will take these recommendations on board very seriously. And we, as you know, this e-commerce week is done with our E-Trade for All partners. They're all international organizations working in this field, providing technical cooperation, advisory services, funding for projects and so forth. The recommendations that come from here, we will also bring to them and to the donors, to the EU, other development partners, and so forth. Because I find that this is one of the most important sessions that we are now tackling now, the financing issues. So now I don't think we can have a better group of panelists than our panelists here and one there. So let me give me the brief introduction of the panelists because they really have done this stuff. So they know what they're talking about when it comes to financing. So Mr. Francois Coupian is the digital manager of the UN Capital Development Funds. Francois is based in Kampala, Uganda. Francois, can you please put your hand up?
Okay, he's on that.
Okay. That's fine. Thank you, Francois. Mr. Nick Williams heads the ICT division of the African Development Bank, and Nick is based in Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire. Nick there. And Catherine is on that side. Yeah. Ms. Catherine Collin is the head of regional representation for East Africa at the European Investment Bank, and Catherine is working out of Nairobi, and Catherine is there. And I have Mr. Tim Kelly, is lead ICT policy specialist, transport and ICT in the World Bank Group, and he's also based here in Nairobi. Tim. And I have Andrietta Muforo, is partner of Telcom Capital, which has offices in Nairobi and Lagos. Andrietta works out of the Nairobi office. Andreas is right next to me. And I have Ms. Amolo Ueno, is East Africa Regional Director at BFA. Amolo heads up the Nairobi office while also leading the Finance for Life area of expertise, focusing on financial services, addressing development areas such as health and education. Amolo is there on my right-hand side. And now to Mr. Simunsa Muyangana, is the co-founder and director of entrepreneurship at Bongo Hive, an innovation and technology hub in Lusaka, Zambia. And I think I have had time to talk with Simunsa, and this is one of the best tech hub experiences. So on my left, and Mr. Sam Chapate is the managing director of Jumia Kenya. Sam is there. And Mr. Eugene Niamunga is general counsel at Retail Pay, a relative newcomer to the digital economy here in Kenya. I was just talking to him, and it was really a great idea of how a startup has begun with a really neat idea. So we are all here. So many thanks for all of you for participating in this session. I know it was raining, so it's kind of a bit difficult to get here, but you're all here now. So it is my intention now to manage the discussion in an interactive. We need to be interactive as much as possible so we can cover as much ground as possible. And as you can see, we have an amazing mix of expertise in this panel, and you cannot have a better group of expertise to talk about financing in the e-commerce space than the panelists we have here. And I am aware that there is a wealth of knowledge and experience also in the audience. This is what we heard for the last 3 days. There were amazing discussions, ideas coming from the audience. So I will encourage all panelists to be concise and short in your interventions so that we leave enough time for interactions with the floor. So now we will go through the parts of this discussion. The first, we start the current status of access to finance for digital entrepreneurs. So let me now get to Andrietta to ask about your perspective on this. And also please tell us a bit of how Telcom Capital comes into this picture, because you have lots of experience.
Good morning, everyone. So we run a venture capital fund called TLCom. So we've been historically investing in Europe and Israel, and over the last couple of years, made some investments in African tech companies. So this was, and back in 2013, we decided to launch a fund to invest in tech-enabled businesses across the Africa continent, having realized that there's enough deal flow for one to actually launch a fund and make significant investments and support African tech entrepreneurs. We managed to close our fund, which I think also speaks to the state of financing. So even just on a fund level, for us it took us 3 years to raise the fund. So in many respects, we were a little bit ahead of our time in terms of when you talk to investors who invest in funds. But we managed to raise a $40 million fund, and we'll close at a higher amount next year. And we have offices in Kenya, Nairobi, and then also in Lagos, Nigeria, and then also in London. And we invest in early to growth stage tech-enabled businesses across sub-Saharan Africa. And we're typical Series A investor, so we don't do seed, but we come when there's this traction and a product market fit has been established. Since our first close, we've invested in 5 companies, of which 2 are in Kenya and 3 are in Nigeria, and we're continuing to deploy funds to high-quality African entrepreneurs. And yeah, so that's it in terms of a brief on our fund. Actually, so maybe I think I should also talk about the type of investors that we managed to bring on board, which was, so we have the Africa Development Bank, the European Investment Bank, and Propaco, our current investors. And then we also have high net worth individuals from Silicon Valley and from Europe. And then to move to the state of financing for African entrepreneurs, our sense is that it's very little in terms of what's available. So you have to look also across the ecosystem. So from angel seed investments to venture capital. So our sense is within the $500,000 to $6 million, there's actually a lack of capital in that space. In the angel and the seed stage, entrepreneurs can try and get money from family or friends and do business plan competitions. I mean, that's still also an area that needs to be cultivated, because what you find is that in Africa, most people are not investing in tech. They're investing in real estate. They're buying houses, apartments, infrastructure. The thought of technology and venture capital, just the perception of high risk blocks them, which also is a challenge that we faced when we were fundraising, because what you find is, if you think about the asset class as venture capital, people will do infrastructure, real estate, private equity before they think about venture capital. And then now if you think on the geography scale, they'll do US, Europe, Israel, China, India, before they think about Africa. So our asset class proved to be fairly unpopular, but what's happening is that I think African investors are seeing the opportunity and seeing the real role that technology plays. If you think about youth employment and creating some of the large businesses of the future and taking advantage of the digital revolution that's happening.
Andrea, can I ask you, because you said 3 years it took you to raise funds. How did you tip it? You have raised successfully $40 million fund. What was that thing that got you going? What was your success story?
I really wish I had the answer to this. I think a couple of things. I think so. The high net worth individuals who are in our fund, they invested fairly early. We always had the European Investment Bank as a supporter, but they could never come in alone as a DFI. So what we needed was the other development finance institutions to come on board. But many of them have never done a venture capital. They've never invested in a venture capital fund. So it took, in fact, the thing that really triggered it was the Boost Africa initiative that the EIB and Africa Development Bank launched. And through that initiative, we were the first investment that they made. So I think a realization was made that we need to do more within the technology space, and supporting entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs. And then they remembered, there's a group of 4 people going around Africa looking for capital. And I think that's part of, I think it was more the investor community caught up with the opportunity that we were seeing.
Thank you very much. Let me now turn to Amolo. Amolo, just to pick up from something Andrietta mentioned about the angels, the early seeds, the ventures, and the role of friends and family investment. Could you please take us through that? And also, what about the lack of growth in capital? I mean, because you have lots of experience in this space.
So my company, BFA, we're a consulting firm that specializes in digital financial services, especially for the low-income end of the market. So the comments I'm going to make are really not about the type of investor, I think the investment opportunity that Andrietta has talked about, but actually the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of micro-entrepreneurs who are trying to develop their business through e-commerce and online selling. But the story is not really that different. It's just the scale that's different. So we've done some research in e-commerce micro-entrepreneurs in Tanzania, Kenya, and Ghana. And we find that just as with the larger or more ambitious, larger digital entrepreneurs, the first place that people get money to start their business is indeed friends and family. And then they go online. Mostly the average micro-entrepreneur seller in Africa is using platforms like WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook to market and sell their products. And what we've seen, which is very interesting, is that they tend to reach a bottleneck. So from their perspective, when they go online, the market is essentially unlimited. They could sell as much as they could possibly produce. But they run into bottlenecks of being able to manage the online world. So partially they have trouble just handling all of the customer service, messaging and communications, dealing with the customers all the time. They find this very oppressive. But then they also lack capital to grow. So there's a micro-entrepreneur, which I think is a target of a lot of government policy and government ambition, is to turn these micro-entrepreneurs into the drivers of the future economy. And they're stuck in their micro size because they've run out of the ability of their friends and family network to support them to grow. So I don't think we're going to see international angel investors coming in at that level. I think it's a challenge to digital finance as a community to come up with new products that work well for that micro-enterprise size. I think some of the banks are starting to offer products that maybe when you're just a little bit bigger and you have 3 or 5 employees and maybe a $5,000 or $10,000 a month turnover, that the banks are starting to offer products that make sense at that market. But I think there is a big challenge to meet this initial growth from getting over that friends and family hurdle, getting out of being a single sole proprietorship, moving into having a few employees and a bit more of a structured or formalized work environment. So I think that's a major challenge, and it's going to be a major challenge if digital commerce is going to deliver on the growth ambitions that we all presumably have for it.
Thank you, Amolo. This is a very, very good point. So let me now turn to Nick, because Nick, you have heard 2 stories. Andrietta's story about, good size fund being launched, and we also heard from Amolo. It's just that the lower end, it's the micro enterprises. They want to grow, they have an idea, they have the ability to sell, but they are constrained by capital. So how does the African Development Bank handle these issues across the region? What are your experiences?
Okay, thanks, and it's lovely to be here on the panel this morning. The bank itself isn't really positioned to invest directly into many of the ventures that we're talking about at the moment, seed stage, growth stage businesses. So what we do is we channel money through players who are positioned to address the market, to get out and meet the thousands of entrepreneurs that are out there and to make those investments, hence the investment, for example, in TLCom's Tide Fund. We've recently put 7 million euros into Partex Fund out of West Africa as well. So we do manage to hit indirectly many ventures. But they're more at that level where they're asking for about $1 million a pop. Now, what the bank is trying to do directly is to encourage the creation of an environment where entrepreneurs can flourish and that they're not hampered by the ecosystem in which they're operating. And we sort of see four quadrants to that problem. One is connectivity. In the end, you need some kind of big fat pipe that allows for data and allows you to do digital things. And frankly, Africa's not in a bad place there. We've got a lot of undersea cables. We've got improving terrestrial fiber. Metro fiber, it's not always as great as it could be. There's issues there. But we've managed, for example, as a bank, even to move funding along with the EU for Central African Republic, so that they're one of the last countries without access to an undersea cable. They will have access to 2 undersea cables via Congo and via Cameroon in due course. So the connectivity story, I think, is getting resolved, and is getting resolved quickly. And in places like Lagos, Kenya, Joburg, it's not really a fundamental problem. The other second quadrant I see is, well, where's the focus? Where do we all meet? Where do we have those serendipitous meetings through which young entrepreneurs can have cracking ideas and find people who can support them? There's sort of 2 routes around it. Here we are in Kenya. We see a more dynamic hub developing down the Ngong Road. For some countries, that isn't the case. I mean, we've invested $70 million in the Damniadio corridor outside Dakar to create a technology park with the aim that will provide some sort of focal point with access to a big fat pipe, with access to spaces for incubators, for hubs, hub to develop, a research center, training center, access to a data center, things that people need access to in order to take forward their ideas without them actually, being a direct investment into their businesses themselves. So we'll carry on doing that. I think Tim will talk about, some of the hub issues, and I think, jury's out on what models actually work and what's most efficient. But, the more we try things, the more we learn. So we're doing stuff around that area. The third quadrant I would push is academia and skills, and there's 2 aspects to that. There's the academic, which is academia is very good at coming up with cracking ideas because that other people can't, because they're not making a profit. And they're just sitting there thinking hard thoughts in a dark room with a cold wet towel over their forehead, and voila, they come up with something that's kind of brilliant, but they don't know how to commercialize it. So that linkage between academia and hubs and the entrepreneurs, they're able to take that forward and make a run at it on a commercial basis. And we're, as a bank, we finance the Carnegie Mellon ICT Centre of Excellence in Rwanda. But, you see around the world, there's the Cambridge Fen in the UK, there's Stanford and Caltech in the West Coast. You need, I think, some kind of linkage to academia. And to be honest, that's still relatively underdeveloped in Africa. We do have it around Witwatersrand, and we do have it a bit in Cape Town. But we don't have many of those centres of excellence. And that's reflecting, I think, on the second aspect of the same quadrant, which is our skills. We have a lot of young people who have entrepreneurial ideas, but they don't necessarily have either the entrepreneurial skills to take them forward or the computing coding skills to take them forward. So the bank's got its own coding for employment program that looks to create 234,000 coders in Africa by 2026 and 130 centres of excellence for coding by 2026. The reality is we need more skills than just coding, though. We know that. We need to find a model that allows people to develop their entrepreneurial skills. And we look to places like India, where they have the double ITs and the triple ITs, where they bring together technology training alongside entrepreneurial business development training. And I think that's a model that Africa needs to reflect upon. We're certainly doing so in the bank, trying to determine what the curriculum would be that would allow a young African to actually bring forward his or her own idea. But that's a real work in progress area. But fundamentally, we've got to crack it. We've got a ton of youth who have ideas, who need employment. We've got an employment problem on the continent. We need to ensure that these guys and girls have the ability to take forward their ideas. And lastly, the last quadrant I'd say is this basic access to finance point, which we'll hear about today. But I think, the fundamental point is if you don't have the other three quadrants right, where's the attraction for finance? So we've got to look at creating a holistic environment in which we can encourage entrepreneurs. And in doing so, hopefully we can move finance away from its current focus on Lagos, Joburg, and Nairobi. They're dragging in most of the finance here. We had a run in Rwanda where we've given a loan to the government so it could support the development of a fund in its own country there. But, it's interesting to see how that story develops, because we might be wishing on a star to assume that every country is going to have an ICT access, a real sector that's entrepreneurial and digitally transformative. It may be that we're in Africa, as we see in other continents, certain places win and certain places don't. My encouragement there is to say, think about what your comparative advantage is. Is it in agriculture? Well, let's focus on agri-tech, for example. So we've got those pieces that hopefully will lead into some of the pipeline for Andreata in the future, and hopefully she'll be investing in more than just Kenya and Nigeria, and I'm sure she will. But it's an indicative that it's a story still developing. Lastly, if I may, just very briefly, because God knows you don't want to hear me for very long, there are other key enablers we still need to put out there. We still need proper data regulation so that it's quite clear what rules apply around digital. We still need to embed ID and the digital ID linked to finance and access to banking so that we can commercialize and monetize our stuff. And that's been, I think, an issue in the past in Zambia. We still need to improve access to devices beyond just a phone to laptops so that people can actually do the inputting required to create some of these things. But that's it. Enough from me. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick. That's a lot from you. I think it takes, but these are the issues that we need to discuss here. So this is very good that you put it, you summarize all the big issues facing the region, with your work in African Development Bank. So let me now continue with this discussion about the main barriers facing digital entrepreneurs. Francois, I saw you nodding your head, so could you please come and tell us from the UN Capital Development Fund in Africa, what do you see as the main barriers and what are the lessons that you bring to this table?
Okay, thank you, Shamika. So good morning, everyone. I think it's a great pleasure to be with all of you this morning. So let me just explain rapidly what is the United Nations Capital Development Fund, because I'm sure that most of you doesn't know what is UNCDF. So we are one of the UN agencies, and within our programs, we are focusing in 20 countries about increasing access to digital finance and also increase digital economies. So what do we have? We have a team of digital finance experts coming from the private sectors that are working on a daily basis with the private sectors, but also with the government, in order to remove the key barriers, in order to accelerate the development of a digital finance ecosystem. So what are we doing on a daily basis? We are working with the central banks in order to make sure that we have the right policy and regulation. We are working with mobile network operators in order to increase network coverage, in order to increase access to mobile phone. Then we are working with different providers that could be microfinance, bank, mobile network operators, and now more and more entrepreneurs and small companies, and we'll be coming to that, in order to really to increase competition on the market and having more and more services that are tailored to be able to focus on the low-income people. We're working also in increasing what we call last mile distribution. So I think technology is really great, but I think it's also really important to make sure that there is an access, for example, for digital finance to be able to transfer cash to digital. And so what I call last mile distribution is an agent network. We're also working with the government and private company in order to make sure that more and more payments are flowing in the system to make it viable and sustainable for the private sectors. And last but not least, we are working with, from a client perspective, just to make sure that the right product and service are developed and that they have the right level of knowledge and financial and digital literacy to be able to properly use it. So recently, also what we see one of the main challenges in the market was innovation, the lack of innovation in different markets, because most of the traditional providers that we have been working with are coming, I would say, with a one-size-fits-all approach. So that's a product and service that they need to bring to large scale. So that's why we have been, since the last 2 years, we are working also a lot more innovation, and with partners like Bongo Hive in Zambia, but also Innovation Hub in Uganda, in order really to be able to tailor and starting developing, let's say, the future service that will really change the life of what we call the vulnerable segment. So we are focusing mainly on the women, youth, farmers, refugee, migrants, and MSMEs. So by working with the different startup company and entrepreneurs, so we have what we call an innovation journey. And so we are really starting from the beginning, so ID phase. So someone's coming to, for example, an innovation lab, coming, yes, I have a great idea. So we help them turning this idea into a concept. So what is a concept is really to try to see from a market's perspective how this idea can be turned in a business that makes sense, to analyze the competition, to analyze the business model, to analyze what should be the partnership this entrepreneur should do in order to be able to launch his solution, with the objective to turn this concept in what we call a minimal viable product. So it's something that you can go in the field and test it. And then if it's successful, to go the step further to build a company and then to scale the company. So through this whole journey with the entrepreneurs, I think there are a lot of challenges. And so we are working in the least developed countries. So where maybe also in terms of innovation, maybe we have the less development in terms of innovation. So one of the first key challenges beyond the finance part, and I will come to the finance part, is concerning the team capacity. All right. So mainly what we have a person with really good idea, coming maybe with an ICT background or financial background. I think what is important for an idea to be successful is to have, let's say, several persons that can work together in order to bring the right expertise to be able to develop this in a bigger way. So then I will come back also to the solution we are bringing to that. The second part, I think also a lot of ideas are not going beyond the idea stage, is also there is limited exit strategy, I think, for innovation in Africa. And so what I mean that is, how can we offer to these entrepreneurs some first exit strategy? I give you some example of what we are doing in different countries. And mainly, I think they're the private sectors of the government have a key role to play. So what we are trying, with our partnership with the private sectors, for example, we are working with a lot of different agro-processors in Uganda, in different countries. So it's big companies. I think one of the challenge is to bring innovation in the company. On the other side, we have the entrepreneurs coming with great ideas. So we are making the link. And I give you an example for an agro-processor in Uganda. One of his key challenge and what he would like to solve in the short term is how he can increase loyalty of farmers in order to make sure that when he's selling seeds to some of the farmers, they're not selling it back to someone else, but they're selling the crops to this agro-processor. So what we are doing is that we have organized a challenge on this topic, making sure we crowd ideas with some entrepreneurs and giving these entrepreneurs, the best entrepreneurs, the opportunity to test in the field and with these agro-processors the ideas. And I think the exit strategy, I think the first client for these entrepreneurs can become this company. And I think that's something, I think it's key because a lot of ideas are not going beyond the idea stage because honestly there is no exit strategy for them. Another key challenge I think faced by entrepreneurs is they don't have a lot of tools to be able to better innovate. And I think one of the first part is concerning, I call that the digital rails. How do we make sure that there is enough phones, all people have access to their phone, and also they can easily, as an entrepreneur, have access to open API and have access to data so they can really leverage, let's say, the digital infrastructure that is in place to grow their market and to grow their ID. I think also the industry is changing, I would say, rapidly in different countries. For example, MTN in Uganda recently launched Open API on their data system, on their payment system. So making, I think, available to all entrepreneur and startup company a way to easily plug in a payment solution to be able that they can develop their business and make money from their business. So I think that's a great opportunities. What is missing is also access to data. I think a lot of digital innovation are leveraging data. I think in most of markets, access to data is a major challenge. And so that's something also we are trying to work with some of the different providers in the country where we are present in order to see how step by step we can provide, let's say, data sets in order to test this. But also in the future, why don't have, let's say, open API on data, so just to make sure that they can leverage this on a longer basis. Concerning financial support, so that's one of the key parts of the, I think finance support is lacking at all stages, from ID, concept, MVP, and then scale. And a lot of ID are not going beyond the ID stage because maybe some entrepreneurs are just lacking maybe less than $1,000 to be able to go to the next step. And so that's really small financing we are talking about. And so what we have done, so in some of the challenge that we have been doing, either we were supporting the best ID to be able to travel to the field, to test this to the field, and really going from the ID to the concept stage and be able to test this concept in the reality. So that's the first part. Then I think there is more money that is required to build the MVP and then to scale. But I think I really would like to make sure that in this discussion also we start from the ID stage, where it's really small amount of money for several entrepreneurs in order to make sure by step you can filter all these ideas to come up with the best example. And I think also one of the key barriers it's for the entrepreneurs maybe is the size of the markets that we have in Africa. I think all markets, I think we're small, I think especially in the market where we are working in the least developed countries, what is really important also for the entrepreneurs is being able to have more regional or global exposure of the ID, just to make sure that they do not focus only on one country, but they have the ability to do that in several countries. And that's why I think the role of the innovation lab like Bongo Hive is also, I think they have several regional partnerships to make sure that entrepreneur can go just behind one country, but to be able to test that in different countries. So I will pause here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Francois. Catherine, I'm coming to you because we want to get the EIB perspective, but let me go to Bongo Hive, because you were talking about, Francois was talking about the whole innovation journey from idea to a successful business venture, all the constraints along that way, and how many partners need to be there. It's not just financing, entrepreneurial skills and all that. Now, Bongo Hive, Simonsa, you have done it. Give us a bit on what was your innovation journey.
All right, so the question we've asked ourselves when we started Bongo Hive initially was, okay, great, how do we help young people develop IT skills that would help them get into the industry? But in the process of doing that, we figured out that there weren't enough jobs, and some of them in the end wanted to explore ideas that they were developing and to find out whether they could take those into the market. And in supporting them, what we ended up doing was developing a 3-layer structure that helps people, if we go through the journey that Francois has, for example, described, is how do people validate the idea that they come up with. So you wake up in the middle of the night with an idea and say, okay, great, this could be a great business opportunity, but then how do we actually know that it could potentially become a business? So we help people with those ideas go through a 3-week boot camp that helps them explore what's the market size, what's the market opportunity, is there demand for this service or product that they're getting into. We see a lot of people working at a point where they're looking at supply, but not inquiring whether there's actual demand for what it is that they want to supply into the market, and we try to help them figure that out. And then ultimately, can they actually pull this off? They've got a good idea, but can they actually pull it off? What are the skills they need to have on the team to be able to, they need to acquire or to put together? If it's one person, do they need other people on the team to be able to actually pull it off? And also, what other resources do they need to be able to do that? Once people get to start that, we ask them to start to test that idea, and hopefully if there's opportunity to turn that into a business, we invite them back into a second tier, which is an early stage customer. We help them gain early stage customers that help them to get revenue. Now, the case in particular in Zambia is that you do not have investment at the level of idea stage, or a lot also at the very, very early stage. We estimate that there's a funding gap of between $20,000 to $250,000 in trying to help businesses at that point try to grow to that point. But then again, when people find out that there's an opportunity for business, the question then becomes are they ready to start to have conversations with the TLComs of this world? So for example, if Telecom Capital say that they're looking for traction, product market fit, what does that mean? So investor readiness is the next level that we're now getting into. It's like, how do we help people that are actually showing that there's potential for growth to start getting into that space. But to address this $20,000 to $250,000 gap, is we're now also asking ourselves is, okay, great, is it important for players who are at that level that are hand-holding early stage enterprises to also then develop the capacity to be able to recognize potential deal flow for the bigger players and invest early to address this gap, and then participate. That helps push them towards the level where organizations like Telecom Capital can then find it better at a size that they would be willing to participate in. So in the process of doing so, the services that we offer include a co-working space that reduces the cost for early stage enterprises to operate from, because especially if they're working in the digital space, a lot of why they need financing then comes around to access to data, access to resources, like where they're going to store or build this platform that they're setting out. But a bulk of their cost then goes towards human resources, is acquiring the correct skills to be able to grow this, to build out this thing. And that's where, for example, traditional banking won't work, because there are no assets to attach an investment to in the digital space to say, okay, great, to securitize loans and things like that. So the questions then that we have to ask ourselves around is, okay, great, what are the different forms of finance vehicles that could address the growth of enterprises in there? Should we be looking at multiple asset classes that allow, for example, if a hub or a structure like a hub was set up, would you invest in the infrastructure that allows them to do the co-working space, so that there's physical infrastructure that is invested in that grows in value over time, and then another layer of that fund then goes into the entrepreneurs that are going to lease out some of the properties inside there, and other infrastructure that goes there, as opposed to a pure fund that probably just goes straight to entrepreneurs. And also, some hubs are experimenting with, for example, with revenue share structures. It's like, okay, great. If early stage enterprises are bootstrapping because there's no investment going into them very, very early, then can you work out with a structure that says, okay, great. If they start to get an early revenue over a couple of years, so 3 to 5 years, is there a percentage of that, 5%, for example, that can come back into supporting a hub or early stage finances into getting that money to come back over time? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Let me now turn to... Sorry. Let me now turn to Catherine. Thank you so much for these thoughts. You see, we talked about the early stage entrepreneurs, the gap in funding. It's a 250K gap. But then the no assets to secure loans. So there are these whole risks for investors and lenders. How does EIB address these issues, especially in this region?
Yeah, thank you, Shamika. Good morning to everyone. First of all, I would love to say that I'm the only non-expert in the digital area on this panel, so because I'm representing the European Investment Bank here in Nairobi, covering all our activities, but maybe quickly presenting to you what we do here in the region and in Africa in general. So EIB, for those who don't know it, is the Bank of the European Union. We are owned by the 28, soon to be 27 member states of the European Union. And we operate globally. I mean, EIB is probably most known in Europe, where we have about 90% of our lending volume, which was last year around 79 billion euro going, and the rest is spread around the world. I mean, Africa is a focus for the EIB. It's actually one of the first regions outside the European Union where we started operating in the 60s. So it's a long journey that we have done. And there are two main axes of our intervention. One of them is the enablers, I can put this way, that means supporting infrastructure. Infrastructure in key sector. Energy is a main sector, our main sector here in the region, renewable energy especially, but also transport and increasingly so ICT. As a matter of fact. So that's maybe where we are getting to the subject of today. So I think on that one, the infrastructure development, we can talk about digitalization, but one of the key is to ensure that the data connectivity reach out to everybody and allows to really leapfrog the potential that there is here on the continent and in the region. So, I mean, improving data connectivity, improving affordability as well is an important element that we need to take into consideration. And that's maybe where we can support by developing reliable infrastructure. Recently, we have, just to give concrete example, we have provided a loan, corporate loans to Telkom Kenya, which is one of the operators here in Kenya, that will enable them to expand their capacity in mobile broadband network as well as optical fiber. And I think that was an important one because those who know Kenya, most of us, we have a Safaricom subscription. And I think it is important to support other operators so that possibly this will also benefit in terms of bringing costs down for the consumers and the users. And the other one is a corporate loan as well that we did to Bandwidth and Cloud Services Group Holding, which it's an interesting case because the day we signed the transaction, they offered a bottle of champagne and they said, thanks to this loan, we have now graduated from a startup to being a small and medium enterprise. And I think that's the kind of reward we would like to hear when we sign transaction, because that means it has an importance for them. And these guys, what they are doing is actually deploying optical fiber in East Africa to reach out, to enable an outreach, a greater outreach. Now, the other axis, and which is more related to what we're discussing here today, is access to finance. In East Africa, we have developed a very substantial portfolio of lines of credit to banks that are there to support, and also to microfinance institutions, I have to say, that are there to support loans to SME and micro enterprises. I mean, these are traditional lines of credit, but they are associated with a very important technical assistance program, which is 5 million for the region here, that actually support not only the banks in building their capacity and improving their skills in terms of risk assessments and tackling issues like environment and social guidelines and standards, which are also quite relevant, but also even training small entrepreneurs on the field and giving them the basic skills and helping them structure their transaction. So I think we are a stage further than the idea that François was mentioning, but still it is a very important, and we've seen that this program has been quite impactful in the region and gets the full appreciation of our beneficiary. And then the other way is, as Nick was mentioning earlier, so by investing, being an investor, and as Andreata was also mentioning to start with, being a core investor in funds. And I have to say personally that coming to this region where I've been for 3 years, I mean, this is where I see an immense impact. And for a structure like EIB, which is a big machinery based in Luxembourg, being able to channel our funds through vehicles like TL Comtide and other, which will have an outreach to the small entrepreneurs, and have an outreach to small entrepreneurs with a great growth potential, because I think this is what we are looking at here, the growth potential that there is on the continent in that area. So this is an area where we are focusing quite a lot, and this region is actually very dynamic. We are invested in a number of funds, and indeed together with the African Development Bank, we launched this Boost Africa initiative about 3 or 4 years ago that really came up from the idea that technology, there is a great appetite for technology on the continent, and I think Kenya is a very good example with M-Pesa, for instance, I mean, which is something we don't have in Europe, and I'm always very frustrated when I go back to Europe that I cannot pay with my phone. And I think that was the idea. I mean, there's a huge potential in it. Let's try and do something to help it out. But indeed, you can't do it with traditional loans, and also because a bank is risk averse by nature. And I think we always have to accept this. So we need to find ways to kind of mitigate the risk or reduce the risk so that it attracts banks as well in the system, because that's also where a lot of the money is. And I think that's where you have the interest on what we call the blending, where we try and mix loans with grants. And there, that's also the beauty of this blending, is that you try and leverage actually loans with the grant element. And so Boost Africa is about this. It's about putting loans from institutions like EIB and the African Development Bank and combining them with grants so that we can actually mitigate the risk and take more risks that what we would be doing in normal circumstances. And so that's what has enabled us to invest in TL Comtide and hopefully other funds that will be coming up, and see how these funds can reach out to the entrepreneurs at a later stage. And I think that's what I take from here as well. I mean, I heard François talking about the whole idea is that we can complement each other. We will not be able to solve all the problems one another, but by combining these different instruments, then we can enable the successful deployment and entrepreneurship. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. You mentioned the immense growth potential of this region, the dynamism that you see in Africa on a day-to-day basis. So let me now, this is a good place to invite Eugene. This is where, I was so impressed to talk to Eugene about the retail pay. It's the new digital platform that you have created, and it's a really neat business model, connecting farmers directly to consumers, really, trying to get the maximum out of this technology. So tell us, what are the issues that you have faced when you launch this new venture, especially when it comes to raising financing?
Thank you very much. Just like you've said, what we are trying to do is we're deploying technology to digitalize trade. And our platforms seek to restructure value chains, eliminating unnecessary brokers who bring price arbitrage. And the result, we hope, is to drive prices down, bring more competition, and get more innovators employed. The interesting challenge, and I agree both with Nick and Francois when they say, and I think this is a point of introspection for techpreneurs, it's very difficult to find a real techpreneur, somebody who is very good in coding, but also business savvy. Most people on the dark side, as we call them, either are not even able to make meetings, they're often introverts, and do not have a way to properly express their innovation in a business sense. So what I see happen, especially in Kenya and in Africa, the first stages, concept to, just from an idea to a concept, is never a big problem, and part of it is because of our culture. In Africa, people tend to come together and contribute to one another to promote each other. But the classification, either as a startup or as an SME, brings itself a curse. And by this I mean, it is almost as if you're too small, you're not allowed to dream big. And so techpreneurs have that challenge of convincing financiers that they need so much funding for their big projects because, there's first the risk, there's the question whether they can manage the finances because they lack the skills, managerial and entrepreneurial skills. So I think there is a real gap in investment in the training and acquisition of these particular skills. And perhaps that is where the suggestion of grants, for example, could come in handy, where you have grants that are given to specific institutions that can help develop some of the skills. And I'm proud to state that we have recently just been appointed to benefit from such a grant from the government of Sweden through SIDA, who have joined our hands with the FSD Kenya, a well-established institution that has held the hands of bigger companies like M-Pesa of Safaricom. And because this is the problem when you have a brilliant idea, but you don't have the capital to take it to market, or the scale of finance required is so large, and nobody has ever heard of you, then it's not easy to go to market. So I think this is one particular area where there's need for focus. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eugene. I think, Nick, you were mentioned by several panelists. Would you want to put a few ideas about what is holding back digital entrepreneurship in Africa? I think you mentioned a few, and then we will open to the. Yeah. Maybe you can start a couple of words, and then we get to other panelists.
Okay, so the question is what's holding back entrepreneurs? It's a difficult question because there's no one answer to it. I mean, people get hit by different things. From our limited experience as a development bank, we do see that there's a fundamental a skills issue, I think, on the continent. And it was well said just now by Eugene, because we're not very good at coming together with a plethora of different skill sets and binding them into something that actually functionally works as a management group. I think we're led by one or two people, and we hope to bring things forward. But I think we still have to develop that kind of business savvy alongside the technical skills. I think that's where we need to get things right, because people don't invest so much in the idea, they invest in the people. Do they buy the person who's sitting in front of them? Do they buy the management group? Because we understand that we understand Africa, we understand the potential of Africa, as we might understand Europe and the potential in Europe. But do we believe that the guys and girls sitting in front of us are going to be able to deliver? And that's why the skills piece is so critically important to my mind. We can do all the rest about connectivity, about links to this, that, and the other. We can, put banks in front of people. That's fine, but if we don't believe them, it ain't going to work. Thanks.
Very good point. I think this is coming through in the whole panel. The the skills, to sell an idea. This is so critical. So before Andrietta, before I get Amolo, before I get to you, let me ask our two panelists who did not have time to say anything, but we will be coming back to you in the next round. Do you want to pitch in at this stage, very shortly?
Yeah, so there are a number of things holding back entrepreneurs in Africa. I think we focused in particular today on the issue of finance. And that will always be a constraint, particularly for startups and particularly for companies that are looking to accelerate their business. We've heard a lot of very promising solutions as to how that finance may be addressed. But I think beyond finance, there are constraints also with regard to the relevant skills, because to be an entrepreneur, you need not only the digital skills, the technical skills, the confidence to break into the market, but you also need the business skills of how to put together a business model, how to sell it to appropriate financiers, and how to implement it and to keep on implementing it until you can be successful. And I guess we often neglect the soft side of the issue, and for organizations such as ourselves, the World Bank Group, it's often much easier to invest in the harder side, the infrastructure, the financing, than it is to invest in the softer side of the skills development and the business models. But I think when we get on to a later session talking about tech hubs, I'll talk about some of the things that the World Bank Group is doing in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Sam?
I think, so I'm part of the Jumia team. For those that don't know Jumia, we build marketplaces across Africa. Marketplaces that allow businesses, SMEs, and larger businesses as well to meet customers and to sell to customers. And through that to have impact and change people's lives. I think there's a big topic around this, which is another form of blending, I think, as Catherine put it, of a way of supporting traditional lending, which is another option to the grant model, which is actually through data. Because I think what we see on a regular basis is entrepreneurs running out of working capital, and therefore literally stopping, guys that have maybe been on Bongo Hive and found product market fit. They've done the hard bit. They've worked out how to develop a product that people want to buy, but then they've run out of working capital, and so they stop selling. And when they go to traditional lenders like banks and even microfinance institutions, they don't get funded, or angels. They don't get funded, and they don't get funded because the funders, the providers of finance, don't have the data to make the decisions about who they should invest in, and therefore to de-risk the whole enterprise. And so I think the key here is a blending of data and traditional lending. And so the question is, who has that data and who can inject that data into the lending decision making so that we can make the decision to lend less risky for the providers of capital?
Thank you, Sam. This we are going to take up in a big way. That's the next session. We come back and looking at what financing tools are out there, the models are out there. So, Andrietta, Amolo, you wanted to say a few things?
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment about the question of what skills are needed by entrepreneurs to attract, especially international capital. And Village Capital put out a report earlier this year that said that 92% of investment in fintech enterprises in Africa last year went to companies that had an expat founder or leader. And in India, 70% of the funds went to people who had attended a set of 10 elite international institutions. And I guess my question to the organizations that fund entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship is, what are the skills that people really need in order to attract investment? Are those skills in presenting PowerPoint pitches, or are they skills in running a business? And I think there's been, or continues to be, a lot of emphasis on training people to do PowerPoint pitches and beautiful business plans, and yet the real skill, and maybe some of the data that Sam is talking about, the real skill has to be identifying your customer, serving your customer with something they want, getting paid for that, and making an investment in your business to deliver on it. And I do wonder if we focus on the wrong type of skills, which are short-term and really irrelevant to developing the business, when there are shortages of business skills. I think that's true. And those are not things that can be cured in a 3-week boot camp, I think. I can't remember, somebody mentioned the development of the Indian Institutes of Technology. It's been a 30-year investment program that has paid off big time, but not short term.
Thank you, Amolo. I think this is a very good point for us to now reach out to the audience. So our question is, what are the main barriers facing digital entrepreneurs in Africa? And give us some of your feedback, and then we will move to the next session of what financing models are out there to fulfill the needs. Toby.
Thank you so much to all the panelists for great early interventions here. I'd like to ask 2 questions, and I cannot really point to anyone. You pick it up as you want. One is that we all always hear about Kenya, Nairobi, and South Africa here. There are so many countries here in Africa. What do you see, what lessons can be learned from these 3 hubs, sort of from Nairobi, Lagos, and maybe Cape Town, that can be sort of helping the other aspiring countries to do more in this area? And the other thing is, it's interesting to hear this emphasis on skills to support the financing issue. Where do you see the best examples of trying to address these skills barriers? Is it the same 3 countries that have come the furthest here in Africa? Or do you see interesting things happening in other countries as well?
Thank you. Yes, please, on that side. Okay, I have the lady at the back. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning. My name is Nandini Harihareshwara. I work for the UN Capital Development Fund with Francois. And one of the questions that's been posed, especially by Amolo, and I really appreciated her question, was what skills or what do entrepreneurs really want help with, other than financing? We know financing is a big issue. And when we talk about that in our markets, especially in Zambia and Malawi, what actually comes up quite often are 3 big things. One is they would like mentors. Both in their particular regions and globally, that can help them better understand how to leverage their services and products in their markets. 2 is connections to the big players. How can they really connect to the big players, again, both in their markets and outside of their markets, to leverage platforms, infrastructure, mobile money infrastructure, or other kinds of infrastructure. And 3 is policy and regulation. Sometimes they're putting forward services and goods that are very unique to the market that need to be tested. And so what is the roadmap that they can build with regulators in their countries to better understand how to test those in a safe way where regulators will be comfortable but actually can provide innovation in their markets?
Thank you. I think you wanted, yes, please go ahead and please introduce yourself, and I'll come to the middle and to this side, and we'll circulate a bit.
Good morning. My name is Martin Bayer from Strathmore University. Latching on to what Amolo had discussed, and also building on some of the statements made by the President and the Secretary General of UNCTAD, Mukisa Kitui pointed out more needs to be invested into the ecosystem. He mentioned multiple 1% in terms of how much maybe goes into research, etc. The President earlier this year, Uhuru Kenyatta, visited Strathmore and heard from micro, small enterprises. They have a skill gap. They desire to export to global markets, continental markets. Could the panel unpack a little bit more? How do we bridge this inequality? Partially what Amolo alluded to. Let me call them domestic entrepreneurs, and then secondly, micro, small enterprises. How do we give them access to a lot of these opportunities we are hearing, and what can an institution like Strathmore do to position itself to fill that gap?
Much. Yes, please, go ahead.
Good morning. I will speak in French because I'm not good at English. Okay. Alors, je suis.
I'm Oteni Ouassiri. I'm from Burkina Faso, and I'm promoter of the Guigo Faso e-commerce platform. This is a platform which focuses on local products in Burkina Faso. We mainly focus on showcasing products from local markets from Burkina Faso and also artisanal products from the country. In terms of financing, we should say that even often ourselves as young entrepreneurs, we don't really know about the existence of some sources of financing. Earlier, I was surprised to hear about a certain number of points raised by the panelists that I wasn't aware of. And it leads me to ask the question, for us young people who've already launched platforms that are in existence but which need a certain amount of expansion now, what should we do? At present, we need really to strengthen what we've already done. We've added, for example, an Android application through which people can place orders for our platform. So this was launched at the beginning of the year, and it creates an argument from the beginning, but then you have to be able to really push this further and pursue this in terms of gaining loyalty of customers and taking other aspects into account, such as communication, the implementation of a network for distribution, etc. And all of this requires financing too. So my question is to know whether at present there is a possibility for a company like our company to really approach people here who could support us in this kind of area. So to expand companies like mine to make my company a true driver for development. Thank you.
Beaucoup.
Good morning, everybody. Excuse me, please. I will speak in French. Okay, bonjour tout le monde. Je suis.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Zodestavi. I'm president of the Cameroonian E-Commerce Federation, also president of the Foundation for the Promotion of E-Commerce in Africa. I'm also an entrepreneur for Motazoi Cam, a company specializing in logistics and e-commerce. We're currently working on an application for mobile payments. In Cameroon, there is a gap in this area. There are only 2 operators working in this field, Kenya and Orange Money. So we are developing an application which will enable us to carry out online payments. As many African young entrepreneurs, we are faced with the issue of financing though. So I'd like to understand how the various panelists here today could help us and support us in order to implement this solution in Cameroon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me take 2 more and then, one who is waving vigorously. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Abia David and I'm from Burundi. And my question goes to the panel on different issues. Most of them have talked, like Nicholas, has talked about what they're doing with the Africa Development Bank. And he said that they're supporting through creating innovation hubs and all those kind of things. And he also said that they recently created an ICT Center of Excellence in Rwanda. And my question goes because in Burundi we are doing a lot with young people. I am the president and founder of an organization called the Save African Youth Campaign. And what we're doing, we are training a lot of youths, almost 11,000 already, on digital entrepreneurship. But the main challenge that you have is on innovation hubs. We don't have, and someone else, I think it's Catherine or Catherine Collins, who's also talked about their support in infrastructure. I think I just want to ask, is there any program specialized for Burundi or that is aiming Burundi, because we really need the infrastructures and we really need an innovation hub, and we really want to know if there's any program either of the Africa Development Bank or of the of the East African Europe Investment Bank. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me take one more question from the lady here. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Chanai Mukumba. I work for an NGO called CUTS based in Zambia. I just had a quick question. One of the speakers mentioned that when looking at investing in sort of startups, at times there can be a bias, I think, towards either expat-led sort of companies or a bias towards, for example, investors that potentially went to elite schools. I'm curious to know, to what extent is this an issue in terms of attracting investment to African startups, and how can this be dealt with?
Thank you very much. So with that, please hold on to your questions, because we will have many other opportunities for you to ask these queries. So I think what we have is now the entrepreneurs have spoken, so let me get some of you, if you want to, our panelists, if you want to jump in and address some of these issues, but they will also be addressed in the later, when we really get to the nitty-gritty of the financing models that we have in this region. Andrietta, please go ahead.
Sure. I can start with the question that was asked here at the front around the fact that most investments are being made in Nigeria. If you think about sub-Saharan Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, and why that's the case and what can be done to make that, to make the other economies generate, I guess, good tech entrepreneurs that can be supported and funded. I mean, interestingly, the way we did it, when we looked at where to focus, so we focus, in sub-Saharan Africa because fundamentally it's an early ecosystem, so one can't really focus on a country. And also, if you think about the markets on the African continent, all the companies that we've invested in are actually operating in another market or even two other markets, because we have we're very fragmented as a continent in terms of the countries. So what you find is, especially in East Africa, you need to immediately have a regional focus when you're starting your company. So I think while not every country is going to thrive in terms of getting a lot of digital or tech entrepreneurs, they will benefit because many of the companies are moving outside of their home base and going into the other markets. And if I just think, and what we did, one of the things that we did is when we looked at our deal flow, as companies are coming in, and then did an analysis of where are they based, then we also look at sectors and the likes, and we found that about 80% of the companies are coming from Nigeria and Kenya, fundamentally, and then South Africa is about 10 to 15% of the deal flow. So those are the primary markets, and then the secondary markets in terms of where we see the most deal flow is so it's Ghana, Ivory Coast, Senegal, Cameroon also features. And I think if I was to think through what are some of the reasons this is the case, I think what I would say, which I think is stuff that has already been mentioned on this panel, one is around government support for these ecosystems. You find while Rwanda is a small market, there's a lot of government support. So you find, for example, companies like Andela have now set up an office in Rwanda. If you think about Nigeria, Omobola Johnson, who was the first ICT minister, did a lot to build the tech ecosystem. She's actually also now a partner in our fund, but she seeded a venture capital fund. She seeded accelerators and innovators, and was really supporting the ecosystem. So and also, of course, here in Kenya as well, you find a lot of support, and in South Africa. So I think government support is key, and on top of that is infrastructure, because you can't be a tech entrepreneur without connectivity, without energy. There are just some key things that, no matter how much you try, you just need the infrastructure. So infrastructure is also very key. I think then another one, of course, that has been said here several times is around skills. So you find, because companies also need to go to a place where you're able to get both technical skills as well as business skills. And you find that those markets are markets that are generating a lot of the technical skills. I mean, I just refer back to Andela. One of the markets so they're in Nigeria, Kenya. They've also launched in Uganda because they see a high concentration of technical skills. So part of it is the foundation is the primary and secondary school education, and the quality of that, setting the foundation for entrepreneurs to have the skills to actually support tech companies. And then I think the other one is really market size, because, and I think also this is just a comment I'll make in general, I think one of the challenges that I find as an investor is that there's a disconnect in the whole ecosystem. So you find, and I think we need to do a better job, we find that there's a disconnect between the accelerators, incubators, and the investors, because sometimes they talk about investment maybe a couple of weeks into the program. But I think that's quite key, because if you're building a business that needs to raise capital, then you need to know what investors are looking for, and what. Because some businesses, so we look at, it's the market, it's the company, and then it's like the actual investment. So if you're building a company in a market that's not very sizable, it'll be very difficult to raise capital. So something can just be just on the market that you're addressing, can be quite small. Yep.
Thank you so much. I think, Francois, you wanted to go, but very briefly. And I know Sam wants to say something too, and followed by Simonsa. So, and then we close, and then we go to the nitty-gritty of what exactly is the financing models out there.
Je peux répondre en français.
Perhaps I can reply in French, since there are French speakers in the room. I think it's Utenid from Burkina Faso who asked the question. Thank you for LinkedIn requests as well. I'll accept it as soon as possible. I'm happy to hear your question, in fact, because we've just launched our program in Burkina Faso. It was launched just 2 weeks ago. And we'll have a 3-year program in the country to stimulate innovation. The main goal for our mandate is to ensure that innovation don't only affect people at the top of the pyramid. We really want innovation to trickle down to meet the needs of the people who are the poorest. For the time being, we're really looking at how we can implement this in Burkina Faso. We're trying to work with innovation labs and hubs there to strengthen their capacity and to become an intermediary in Burkina Faso for all startup companies so that they can have access to financing and access to the skills that they need. So I would propose that I put you in contact with my colleagues in Burkina Faso, and that would be a first way to move forwards. Now, for our colleague from Cameroon, I can't see him. Oh, there he is. Just to answer in French as well. We're not in Cameroon yet, unfortunately, but I would give you a few pieces of advice. You're talking about mobile payments. I think Orange is on the market, and MTN as well. I think it would be important, in your case, to have a good positioning with regards to these two companies, whether you want to compete with them or whether you want to leverage their skills. These could be enablers, in fact, I would call them. So as startups, you can leverage their knowledge and skills in order to move forwards in the market. In terms of financing issues, from the start, I think you're lucky to be in an area which covers quite a few areas, CEMAC, which has common regulations and common markets. So you maybe should think on a regional level rather than national level. If I was an investor taking a position on startups, this would be very important to me because I could look at the possibilities for development in the area. I have a colleague from Cameroon. Perhaps I could also put you in contact with that person so they can give you more information on the situation in Cameroon.
Francois, let me move to Sam, and then we need to, I think we are a bit running out of time now, according to my
Sure.
Yes.
I think just a quick build really on what Andriato was saying around the point around why is there such a focus of investment in the 3 hubs mentioned, in Nairobi, Lagos, and South Africa, Cape Town. I think a big piece of this comes down to the fact that entrepreneurship in itself is about selling dreams, right, to everyone involved in the ecosystem. One to a team, because you have, as an early entrepreneur, you need to bring people along on the journey with you, and you need to get talented people that have other opportunities to go and work for more established companies or in other markets, for example, to come and join you. You need to convince entrepreneurs that it's worth taking the risk with you as well. And so what's important there is having early wins in the ecosystem, like companies from your ecosystem that have made it. And I think if you look at those 3 hubs, it's a chicken and egg thing, potentially. If there was no investment, then maybe they wouldn't have made it. But if you look at Flutterwave in Nigeria, if you look at the tech success that is M-Pesa here, even though it was sort of an intrapreneurship within Safaricom, or if you look at a number of other reasonably large successful companies here, if you look at Takealot, if you look at the the businesses that have worked well in South Africa under the Naspers brand, like I think of those hubs, they've all had examples of tech businesses that have succeeded to quite a large scale early enough, and that builds confidence within the investor sphere and within the talent sphere as well, that taking the risk involved with early entrepreneurship is worthwhile.
Simon, so you have 1 minute.
All right, great. So market size is something that concerns us as well, with regards to when we have companies with a great idea that start to build out, then the question then becomes where they're going to grow out to. And you're completely correct when you talk about fragmentation within the continent. So if we say Zambia, for example, is 13 million people, 16 million people, somewhere there about, Malawi 19, then Zimbabwe about 13. So what we've done is we've decided to get together with 2 other hubs in Malawi and Zimbabwe to form what we call the Southern African Venture Partnership, where we say, okay, great, can we get companies to get a purview into what's happening in the other countries, and to see those as opportunities for growth, so that if it works in Zambia, can it potentially grow out into Malawi? Can it potentially grow out into Zimbabwe? So that yes, you start to deal with the scale that starts to interest investors within that region. And so we're starting off with, for example, companies that have come out of Bongo Hive, for example, in the last 3 years, have managed to raise at very, very early stage, with early stage commitments, have managed to raise about $950,000 over the last 3 years. So we're saying, oh great, how do we grow these, and how do we help them how do we help them scale out into other markets? And because, like I said, the interest is in the 3 hubs as well, that's why we've now started considering, okay, great, let's set up a fund so that we can help these companies grow into those regions, and then from there, when they get to a certain size, we can then attract later stage finance to get into these companies. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Simon. So it's very clearly, big populations, big middle classes, enabling environment. You have business growing. This is kind of a back to basics kind of story, and that's why it's extremely important to have cross-border ability to do cross-border trading. More you do cross-border, you have a much bigger markets, much bigger middle classes to access. So now let me move to the third issue for the discussion is, we heard a lot about the commercial banks are risk averse, and there are concerns to raise funds. So now I would like to, from your experience, I would like to raise what role the financial sector, including banks, of course, and venture capital firms can play to enhance access to finance. So let me start with Sam, because Sam, you started to talk about blended funding, blended financing. So could you please take us through these new innovative ways of funding if we cannot get funds from the commercial banks?
Sure. The idea that we've seen work, and we've started to do this with partners on our side, is to leverage superior data to de-risk the decision of lending or investing. For financiers, and there are better placed people in this panel to build on this, but a large part of the decision to invest or not comes down to, do you believe in the growth story and the monetization story of the businesses in front of you? and I think by using data, you can access that. So, for example, on the e-commerce or on the online marketplaces type of business model, you have a lot of sales data. You have a lot of sales data, and you have a lot of data, behavioral data as well, so that you can differentiate between the SMEs that you're working with, and work out who are the people that are behaving, have consistency in their behavior, have consistency in their sales, and using that data to make the lending decisions. We've started to do it. We've started to share our data with microfinance institutions and with banks so that they can make better lending decisions. And so that, number one, makes more, gives more yeses to the financing decisions, like allows banks and those microfinance institutions to lend more, but also at better prices, because the data de-risks the investing decision, and therefore the rates at which they lend become more competitive, which is obviously helpful for the sustainability of those businesses.
Thank you so much, Sam. Simmons, would you like to pick up some of the ideas that he brought? Because you are a director of entrepreneurship at Bongo Hive, an innovation and technology hub in Lusaka. So what role you see for the financial sector?
So I'm going to include something in response to Chenai's question around why is it that funding goes to certain. A lot of that is pattern recognition. It's people with the financing are so far away that they have no idea what's going on the continent, and we also, I have to admit, do a terrible job of selling ourselves, marketing ourselves. And saying what's actually going on and making that visible to everybody. So it becomes easier for a financer at an end to say, okay, great. If I look at businesses here in the U.S., how many have come from people that have gone to Harvard, have gone to Stanford, or whatever the case may be? Then if I find a similar cohort of people within the continent, then those are the people I can possibly trust to invest in. I'm oversimplifying it, but it's something like that. But then, how do we solve it for ourselves then? So one place that we need to start to encourage people is, if they're high net worth individuals within the country, can they start to look at startups or digital companies as alternative investments other than where they're currently investing. So angel investment then provides an opportunity. And that's a good thing because, again, I'm stereotyping, but then angel investors will traditionally invest in portfolios where they have previous experience or an understanding of the sector due to prior experience. So if somebody had a great experience in agriculture, they're more and then they've managed to make some money, they're more likely to look at agriculture as a space that they understand and where the market opportunity is, and to guide and work with a company in a sector that they understand. So then hopefully they've got the network, and hopefully they've got not only the network, but they've got the words elude me right now. But they've got the stature to be able to say, great, because I'm involved in this company, that can attract follow-on investment. Say, okay, great, we know you, we know your experience. We know what you're able to do, and then we can invest. We can follow investments because you're close to a company in that place. Then again, it's the people working closest with the companies that are coming up. Can they help to manage the companies and work alongside the companies to make sure that as they grow in the early stage, that they can any finances that go into them can be managed, can be governed, and can go to a stage where they are secure companies for follow investment. And then early stage finances in some of the regions that before you get to funds that starts to look at a regional or more Africa play. Yeah.
Thank you very much. These are very good points. Andretta, you want to follow up on what Simonsa says? Yes, please go ahead.
Sure, I just want to build on that. I think my also sense is that it's an early ecosystem. So a lot of that, I think, is a reflection of the fact that people are raising from their own networks or the networks that they've built, because like within Africa, there are no institutions that are investing in tech entrepreneurs, and neither high net worth individuals. I think also we need more locally based VCs, because then I understand the market, I understand the business model, I live in the market, so I'm not enamored by the fact that you went to a particular university. I need to see the market. So if we have more people who actually understand the market, I think some of that distortion might go away. And then we need successes, because many ecosystems, entrepreneurs who are able to exit and succeed are the ones who come back and give to the ecosystem, and then also it attracts more people to look at the ecosystem. So we also need more successes.
Let me turn to Catherine. Catherine, could you take us through some of the instruments you have at the EIB to deploy? In this sense, I think Boost Africa has come up as a good example in the region in many of the discussions here. Thank you.
Thanks. I think maybe I probably went through them. I think we have a mandate, and that mandate enables us to deploy also various instruments: senior debt, junior debt, equity, and then technical assistance. But maybe if you allow me, I would think, based on the various comments that were made, I think from the perspective of EIB, and EIB being based in Luxembourg, and then a representation here locally, I find myself very often having to somehow fight the case simply because the perception. And I think there is a lot of which has to do about perception of risk versus actual risk, and that is a very important element. And probably I like the point that was made that maybe entrepreneurs need to market themselves better, but us financiers, we also need to market first of all, as somebody was saying, you know, all what exists in terms of instruments is not well known, so probably we have a bit of work to be doing on how do we, we mention and how we communicate about what we can do, and do it maybe also in a language that is more comprehensible because we also have our own jargon. I mean, working for a new institution, I mean, sometimes even myself, I'm a bit disturbed by all the jargons that we are using. And so that's something we need to bear in mind and speak the same language. The perception, but I also agree with Andreata, have successes. Because, and also the point about data and how it can help somehow mitigate this perception. Because as a banker, as a lender, you take risk, or as an investor, you take risk and you expect either to get your money back or to get a return on your investment. And I think this is something that we can all accept, and we should probably all accept, because that's the nature of the business. So we need to base ourselves, our judgment, on something tangible. So an idea is very nice, but unfortunately it requires a bit more than that. And so that's why it's nice to hear that everything that is being done to bring ideas to a stage where it can materialize. But this, we need to have ideas that were a success, that were run by Africans, and the concept of scalability is extremely important as well, because as an investor, you will only achieve a return provided you are able to scale up or to see the best business scaling up. So I think, as I said, this is all things that I have gathered from being here and discussing with the people here, and then making the relay to our colleagues. And large institutions like us, we need to be able to understand what's happening on the field and have success that we can after that market, to enable our colleagues then to be a bit less risk averse and go for it. I mean, thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Anybody else here on the table? Eugene, would you like to add something at this stage? No? Okay, thank you. So what's coming through very clearly is, e-commerce and digital trade, this is a new space. So of course, the bankers, the financiers would want to assess the risk. So when you don't know the business, you are a bit nervous. So that's why the more data was the request for more data, and maybe pretty PowerPoints, and somebody with a big degree from a big schools, they would all play into the story because a lot of people don't know the business. So the whole idea of the perception of risk and how do you address perception of risk, how do you minimize the risk, perception of risk in this area is a big takeaway for us here. So let us now move to the very fancy topic, because everybody talks about the tech hubs, the incubators, the accelerators. I think this is, in Geneva, this is what our member states want to hear. What are the success stories? What are the conditions to success? So we are now moving into that topic. So that's our fourth issue for discussion, and we need a lot of input from you too, from the audience. So in view of the common reference to the role of tech hubs, incubators, accelerators in Africa, what do we know about their impact and how to ensure that they are effective? This is like the million-dollar question that is being raised by all and sundry, from UNCTAD, from our policy analysis sections too. So let me go to Tim. Tim, tell us from the World Bank experience, how the World Bank has looked into the role of tech hubs and what lessons you have learned, working across many regions.
Sure. So thank you. When Nick was speaking earlier, he described the vision that the African Development Bank has developed for the digital economy in terms of 4 different quadrants. Well, we at the World Bank like to think ourselves as a little bit better. So we've gone for 5 different pillars in our vision. So we think of the digital economy in terms of digital infrastructure, obviously, as being the foundation, digital platforms, and we've talked about many of them, such as e-commerce and digital ID, digital financial services, both the supply side that we've talked about a lot on this panel, but also, of course, the demand side of how to promote financial inclusion. Digital skills and literacy, clearly very important. And then, of course, digital innovation and entrepreneurship, which is the subject of this panel. And it's in some ways the most difficult to define. We recognize digital entrepreneurship when we see it, but we can't always define it very well. And it's also, I think, one of the hardest to develop programs or interventions that seek to promote digital innovation and entrepreneurship. There are many examples of programs which have not been terribly successful, but equally I think there are now a growing number of programs where we are seeing breakthroughs in terms of job growth, in terms of creation of new companies that then break out of the sort of initial cycle of family and friends and actually make it into large-scale employers. So in terms of the World Bank Group involvement, and when I talk about the World Bank Group, obviously not only the IBRD that I work for, but also the IFC, the private sector arm, you can think of it in terms of 3 phases. I think pre-2010, we were very much invested in the more traditional model of science parks and industrial parks, and a sort of real estate model for development. And that kind of fits the business model of the World Bank quite well, because we often look for big ticket items to invest in. It's easier to get it past our board if there's an extra few zeros on the investment. But I think we realized that model wasn't working very well. There were too many white elephant business parks around Africa and around the rest of the world. And what I sometimes call the empty incubator syndrome, of incubators that look great from the outside, but they don't have a single coffee stain, they don't have a single messy entry line at the start. So how to avoid that empty incubator syndrome? So starting in 2010, we began investing, initially using grant funding in tech hubs. I think one of our first investments was here in Africa, in the M-Lab, East Africa, which I'm happy to say is continuing to do well even after the grant money ran out. So much more focused on organic, bottom-up sort of investments, and at a smaller scale, using trust funds and grant funding. And since 2016, we've begun to convert that into more of the regular work program of the bank, funding tech hubs through investment lending, which is, of course, the main source of activity from an organization like the World Bank. So what do we look for when we're seeking to invest in tech hubs? I think an ecosystem approach in which there are multiple different stakeholders, not only governments, but also academia, the private sector, NGOs, community-based organizations. And we do tend to also look for a consortium-style approach, perhaps a PPP, or certainly a consortium approach which brings together different investors. So for the MLab in East Africa, for instance, we worked with the University of Nairobi, iHub, which had just opened as a tech hub. We also brought in a training firm from the private sector and the World Wide Web Foundation as an NGO. We look for organizations to invest in that have a program of sub-grants. For instance, when we're investing in a tech hub, we often insist that maybe a third to a half of the money that we invest in the grant manager is reinvested in smaller grants that actually go to entrepreneurs. Because of our business model, we often find it difficult to reach out directly to entrepreneurs, but if we can use sub-grants as a way of doing that, all the better. We seek to avoid market distortion. If there is already a good commercial sector for tech hubs or already a good tech hub scene in a country, we won't necessarily invest and distort the market. I think one of the important messages is don't fight geography. A lot of countries try to use their investment in science parks and tech hubs as a way of maybe decentralizing growth from capital cities. And that's a very creditable alternative. But the reality is tech hubs that are in the middle of nowhere do not work. Kenya has discovered that with its Konza City. Mozambique has discovered it with its attempts to develop a science park 60 kilometers from Maputo. So don't fight geography. Go to where the people are rather than trying to move the people, creative people, to where the money is. And then finally, we always try to use competitive tendering, and that always works well. So a few examples of how we've invested. I mentioned our support for MLab East Africa here in Nairobi. We also have a bigger investment at the Climate Tech Centre at Strathmore University and at NILAB, which is in the Bishop Magwa Centre on Ngong Road, which Nick mentioned as being the sort of epicenter of entrepreneurship in Nairobi. In South Africa, we invested in the MLab Southern Africa, and in Senegal, we invested in CITIC, also as a sort of startup tech hub. We have some new investments in Ghana, which are part of this new wave of using investment lending. And we've invested in Ghana Innovation Hub and Ghana Tech Lab, both in Accra, at the Accra Digital Center. And we've also invested in an innovation hub in Kumasi. I think this is one of the first times that the bank has invested in a tech hub outside of a capital city. In Malawi, I think our colleague Simunza was talking about bongo hives investments in Malawi. Well, we also have a $5 million program which we'll be rolling out there as part of the new Digital Malawi program. And finally, in Comoros, we've invested in a co-working space. It's clear that not every economy has the scale or the startup developer community to be able to support a fully blown incubator or a tech hub. And therefore, I think working with co-working spaces, as we are doing in Comoros, is a good way of sort of getting your feet wet in a particular market and helping, if you like, the pre-incubation space, the creation of new ideas, the creation of new entrepreneurs. So that's a brief picture of what we're trying to do. And as I say, we try to picture ourselves as just a little bit better than the African Development Bank. So wrong.
Thank you, team. So let me get to Nick, because I heard Nick saying it is so wrong. So tell us how African Development Bank is doing a much better job than the World Bank.
Yes, well, this could be a long conversation.
It's short.
No, don't worry. Everything Tim said, God bless him, aside from his criticism of the bank, was right. I mean, it's fair what they're doing on hub development. We have taken a more an approach more aimed at trying to get governments to resolve their thinking around the tech space in the first place. So whilst Tim's working down in the area of, the young entrepreneurs getting his hands dirty and passing cash through, we're trying to create the ecosystem that allows the entrepreneur to bring forward ideas. And, we have ideas ourselves around how you can get access to devices in markets through government intervention, but that would actually allow students to access devices that they could then use to create, while still at university, entrepreneurial ideas. We aren't so dismissive of technology parks per se, but we think that the governments need to use, if they're going to think about a technology park, they've got to think about what's their actual priority here. What is it that they're focusing on? And it's not enough just to build a technology park and think people will come. They won't. You have to market it. So if you go through the marketing exercise, you'll understand what actually might work in a given area. And we financed a park in Senegal, and it's kind of generic, I confess. And that's possible in Senegal because it's becoming a tech hub of its own in West Africa. Companies will want to set up there because they need a presence in West Africa. But if you go to some of the other countries like Mali and Burkina afterwards, they're not going to be able to attract those same companies as their hub headquarters. So what is it that they're attracting? And I think it is valuable for governments to think about what their priorities are, but obviously listen to the private sector on the ground. So we're trying to help governments at that strategic level think about their priorities, with a view to removing some of the impediments that governments put in place to entrepreneurism, and seeing how they might actually foster it through things like skills development. We're less busy at the moment in the actual innovation space at the hub level. That's something we're reviewing at the moment. We don't have the breadth of instruments that Tim has access to on the grant financing side, but that is certainly something that the bank's trying to address within its skills portfolio. So you'll see more on that, and we'll be dragging on lessons from others like the World Bank about, what's actually an effective model. I think that's still open for debate, and half expecting a lot of questions back and comments back from the audience today about what actually works. Last point I would say is, I think we can be worried about events in Africa and how things are developing. I do think they're timing issues, and I don't think we should get lost on a point and be too negative. This is a continent that's quickly getting digitized. It's moved a heck of a long way from 20 years ago, and it's moving ever faster. A lot of this thing around where finance finally goes, and its predilection to capital follows capital, that will get broken down as we see other successes, and I think that was the point others have said on the panel. So I think things are running well. I think that we've got good problems, for example, at the bank in trying to work out which hubs are good, rather than worrying about there's no hubs at all. So.
Thank you very much. On this point, let me turn to Simonsa. You have the only one on this panel actually running a tech hub. So what do you think are the key factors to make a tech hub works to support the digital entrepreneurship? What are the key conditions for success? You have made it a success.
All right. So I have to confess that I'm a skeptic with regards to whether hubs can work everywhere. I actually don't think they can. And I think we've belabored the point that, for example, there are certain elements to build good companies, and some of those are, for a hub to succeed, it's the people. You need the right people to be able to come into the hub to start these companies and then build these companies that are going to become the successes. And if the people have the skills that they require to build these companies, that's the first thing that you're going to need. So where are these people going to come from? And the closer you are to them, the better. So, for example, being in a place where a university is close, or a place that that is churning out people with digital skills or with business skills or with starts to help you get to a place where you can where you've got people that can, young people that can come in, or regardless of age, you've got people that can come in with ideas and that can get started, and they can find other people that they can bring onto their teams to build these companies there. Then it's access to people who've had experience building businesses, people who are going to be mentors, people who can work alongside these people who are building businesses, people who can give insights into markets, people who can give insights into the technical knowledge that these new businesses are going to need to have access to. And then it's connections and partnerships. So where are the companies that they're going to be connected to? So if a company is going to need to work with a mobile network operator, for example, as part of their scale and part of their rollout, it doesn't help that you're 300 kilometers away from the head office of a mobile network operator. If you're working in agriculture, are you close enough to be able to talk to? Are you close to market? Are you close to the companies that are getting out into places where the agriculture is taking place? So those are some of the elements that I think that provide for what is a potentially a great place to set up a hub with. I just need to correct something that Tim said, which is something we'd like to get to, but haven't started yet, is that yes, we would like to get to a place. We are in the process of setting up a fund that would do seed stage investments that would look at Lusaka, Zambia, Malawi, and Zimbabwe. We haven't yet started investing in Malawi, so yeah, I needed to correct that.
Okay, so I think maybe and start the discussion to invest in Malawi. So let me now move to Sam. Sam, what do you have? What experience do you have from Jumia?
I think a point that was made on the floor before that can be a key enabler of success is mentoring. And again, I think that's one of the benefits of hubs, is being able to, companies that are just getting started, that have had their first signs of success, being able to learn the basics of business building from people that are just in front of them. And I think a lot of the conversations that I have with companies that are starting out, often that are in these hubs as well, is how do you hire? How do you structure your team? How do you think about the real fundamentals of business building stuff that you probably don't get at the sort of really practical level from your investors or from people around you that aren't building businesses. So I think that sort of mentorship thing is very interesting. I think one idea that we've been playing with actually for the Kenya office here is we're going to move into a new office relatively soon, and could we do that in the same facility as a hub, for example, so that we could there could be cross-pollination of ideas and lots of new businesses that build up around our business. So I think that's an interesting model.
Thank you so much. So what's coming out is the ecosystems approach to incubators. That's kind of one of the key success factors. So let me, before I go to Francois, Andrietta, you wanted to add to some of the comments that's been made here?
Yes, just from an investor's point of view in terms of what are effective accelerators or incubators, because these are critical to us, because these should be feeders of some of our deal flow. And so I think two things that I would see as valuable is, one, building an ecosystem, so creating a vibrant ecosystem where people can meet co-founders, they can get the mentoring and the support that they need, or just learn about what's happening in the ecosystem. And then the second one, which is where we feel we've not done very well in terms of the tech hubs on the continent, is to be factories of companies that are investable. Because I think fundamentally that should be the KPI, that should be the ultimate goal, so that it's not just a place where young people are coming together, but it should be more than that. We should actually be building companies from these tech hubs. So I think what has happened is, I'm hard-pressed to come up with, say, 5 companies that have, raised significant follow-on funding that came out of the hubs. I think also, as we build and as we support tech hubs, I think it's important to think through what are the key elements that will make these hubs become factories of tech companies for the continent.
Very good points, Andretta. Francois, because the UNCDF is supporting tech hubs, incubators, and accelerators, so share your experience with us and what lessons you have learned in this.
Yes, thank you. So I think from more perspective, I think this tech hub, they are amazing or fabulous platform in order to scale innovation in the countries where we are. But we recognize that in all of the country where we are, the level of development is very different. And I think I speak from a development organization point of view. I think what we just need all of us to make sure is that we invest long-term in this platform. And I think I would like to warn all of us. I don't like hackathons anymore. And why I don't like hackathon? Because I think in the development organization, we all want to position ourselves for innovation. And the fast way to do that is just to invest maybe 30 or 40,000 in a tech lab. And you will get, let's say, a 3-day challenge, and so you can really promote it, good result. But I don't think it's good for innovation. And I tell you why. I've been speaking with a lot of tech hub. I think what we are creating, we are not creating entrepreneurs, we are creating good presenters of ideas that are jumping from one ideas to another ideas just to get the prize money. And so when you talk with a lot of these hubs in different countries, I think in the country we are in Uganda, we are in Zambia, we are in different countries, I think that's what we learn. And they say, so I think from a development organization point of view, let's make sure that we go beyond the ID stage and we invest long-term into this. And so that's the role that UNCDF is currently, let's say, doing in different countries. So what we would like to do, our objective is really to grow the market and to develop, let's say, the innovation at country level. So according to the level of the development of the hubs, I think we provide different tools that can really, let's say, grow the capacity, the skills, the financial of the hubs. And I think that complements quite really well what is done by African Development Banks or IBRD, because we don't have a lot of fundings. Mainly we have a lot of skills. We have some small funding in order to anticipate. So what do we do? So tech hubs, I think, as I say, has different levels. So it can be sometimes only a co-working space. I think it's the first start. So what we are providing in tools, for example, mentorships. So we discussed about mentorship. So we have a network of international mentors on different areas that we can really complement, let's say, and we provide that as a tool for this event tech hub. With the objective not to replace the mentor, but really to transfer the capacity to the tech hub, just to make sure that step by step they can do that on their own. The second part, we discussed about blended finance. I think UNCDF, we have the opportunity, we have different financial instruments going from small grants, loan, guarantee, and also some investment. So we are really willing to work with different entrepreneurs and complement the work of the tech hubs in order to be able to provide the right services. Also in countries, so we have teams that have deep relationship with the government, with the private sectors. So the objective is also to be able to link this tech hub to some of the government. And I think it's not always easy for a startup company to be able to knock at the door of MTN, Orange, or all these different players. It's not easy for a startup company to try to understand the government and policy and regulatory environment. So that's also an area where we can contribute. And I think one of the also last part that we are bringing, we are in several countries, so we can also make the link and contribute regionally and globally through the different hubs, just to make sure that I think all these ideas can be leveraged and offer better perspective and grow perspective for the different startups.
Thank you, Francois. Anybody else wants to add something to this discussion? Eugene, would you want to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to say that it's also, I think, interesting to observe that even as, I mean, the hubs are great ideas and there's a lot to learn. They produce most of our investors or techpreneurs. But I would think it's great if if governments and development partners would focus more on skills other than the talent that they bring within those spaces, but also to reflect on the nature of this area, which is digital world, to not just think about the real estate, but also the e-spaces that you can create as network spaces for some of these techpreneurs. Because some of the engineers, software engineers, for example, they are really not very social, and they run away from these kind of spaces. So if you create for them a virtual space, where you give them the information and the training that they wish for, you will find you might attract more people than you would find in a physical space. Thank you.
We should have space for nerds. Yeah, Simonsa.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment with regards to tech hubs also currently find themselves in a space where they're conflicted between responding to or building companies that interest investors, so potentially high growth companies, and producing numbers for people who will support them through grants. So you find that for a grant that you get, you say, okay, great, you should have 500, I exaggerate, but I mean, like, you should have 500 entrepreneurs by the end of the year. And you're not going to get 500 high growth companies at the end of that year. So anybody who's thinking of getting into the tech hub accelerator incubator space should really think about whether this is the right tool, for you to use to build in. If you're building small businesses, I think that's a different tool. That's something that you should intentionally decide to do and say, okay, great, we want to release small business support, give business advice, help businesses help small businesses access financing from banks and so forth and so on, all that stuff. But if you're building businesses that are going to attract investment finance, it's a totally different type of vehicle, or a different type of entity that you're building that's going to be able to do that. And conversations need to be very, very clear with grant supporters ahead of time to say, okay, great, we're not going to do scale, we're not going to do 1,000 people, we're not going to do 10,000 people. In that way, yeah.
Allow me to just add one point, please. Yeah.
Yes, please go.
Thanks. Yeah, Francois raised a point, which I think it's one that we have experience with, which I would like to also just elaborate on. It is true that sometimes you just have very good presentations being made to potential investors and donors. But it is equally true that because of that lack of connection between, and the distance between investors, development partners, and this world of techpreneurs, sometimes great ideas don't get either well pitched or funded because of that space. And perhaps the development partners and investors could also have a different approach, where instead of just sitting and waiting for great PowerPoints, which then could lead to misinvestment, they could float areas that they wish to finance and say that if you have a great idea that will, for example, ensure greater efficiency in this area, health, agriculture, or something, we will fund it subject to certain objective criteria, so that by the time you're meeting with these techpreneurs, they already know that, what you want to fund and that your interests are aligned. And in that case, then I would suggest that they focus more on program or project financing.
Thank you, Eugene. Good point. So I'm coming back to all of you to get to that point. So let me collect some questions here. I know you wanted to say something earlier too. Please go ahead and identify yourself, please.
My name is Matendo. I'm a CEO of a Burundi shop company. Me as one of the pioneers of e-commerce startup in Africa, in East Africa, I can tell you that we experienced a big challenge in raising funds for e-commerce projects. I met many local investors, and they are enthusiastic with our project. But when we ask them to invest in, they are not ready to invest. Even those who accept to invest, the engagement is very, very limited. Even commercial banks are not ready to finance e-commerce projects because their loans are currently oriented toward short-term projects with a quick return of investment. I can tell you that in board I have a partner, a bank, a commercial bank as a partner, but it's still very, very hard to raise a fund from them. So my questions, we tried also with some private sector organization as Trademark East Africa, and I can tell you that my project is very, very innovative, and I won a competition called Trademark East Africa. I was in the first, in a finalist, but I didn't get the award they has promised to me to in that competition. So I have two questions. My question is what eTrade for All can do to create a fund for supporting or to reward innovative e-commerce projects. Another question goes to Nicolas and Francois. As a private sector company, is it possible to get access to finance from African Development Bank or European Bank? If yes, which is the condition? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think there's a little bit of a pitching going on here too. So please also share your views on your own experience in tech hubs, incubators, accelerators too, because we want to hear from the real people who have gone through these models. Yes, please, the lady here.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Juliana Kisimbi. I'm a Kenyan, and I was a former director in the team that implemented Kenya's single window and electronic platform for trade. So mine is really like a counsel to find out. I'll ask a question and then I'll give her a comment. My question is, would it be easier if the Techno Hub innovators come together and they pitch together as a team? Is it easier to get financing together or as individuals? And my comment then would be that if they are able, because somebody will fund something that they can see is ongoing. I'll go off like our own example. We transformed paper into a parastatal that employs over 100 employees today. And what we saw was that one, it under, I think it's chapter 20 of the United Nations requirement, is that African countries that have the single window are able to trade easily with the globe. So that was a requirement. So we had to meet that requirement. And how did that requirement have to be met? It had to be met through a structure. And what was the structure? The structure was a board and a management team and staff. We had to have a body that would be able to attract let's say, funding. And so once we were up and running, we were able to get funding from the International Climate Fund, from the World Trade Organization, from Trademark East Africa, and from many other organizations. So what am I saying? In a very simple nutshell, most people with money will not fund an idea most of the time, but they will fund an ongoing project that looks credible and that it's got a future and that it's got a good ROI. So basically, the projects must be ongoing. A very simple example, I have a friend living in the United States. She did an invention and she was selling from the backyard of her bedroom and online. And when she went to pitch her idea, when her customer base grew, she got funded $50,000 because she already had a client base. She had a product which needed an upgrade of a better packaging and more ingredients. So basically what you need to do, you must have something going for you to be able to attract money. Money only gets attracted by other money. So that's how it goes in this business.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Yes, please go ahead.
Merci, je veux parler en français.
Speak in French. I'm Ms. Jackie Mzoumini from the DRC. I'd just like to try and set out a few issues with regards to concerns in my country. The question of financial inclusion is a concern in the DRC. At present, we have a few solutions through mobile operators operating in the country. So Vodafone, Artel, and Orange. These are trying to instill a solution in terms of transactions in the country, given the poverty and the lack of infrastructure in our country. We have these three operators who are working in the field for mobile money, but unfortunately they're not interconnected, so that's a challenge. Here I'd like the panelists to try and explain to us what they think we could put in place so that all operators can come to the table and be interconnected to facilitate transactions. That's the first concern. Secondly, within our country, there are operators in the back country who have products but they can't sell these due to the issues that I've already raised. What solutions could we implement from the panelists in order to resolve these backcountry issues in the country? Now, with regards to what Ms. Let me find this in my notes. With regards to what Ms. Catherine said, she said that she's been operating in Kenya for around 3 years, and there are solutions for activities or transactions related to mobile telephony, which would enable mobile money. But then when she goes back to her country, she feels like she's entering into another world. So we are working on e-commerce in Africa here. What can other Africans in other countries facing these issues can do? And how have some countries found solutions in terms of interconnectedness? For the continental free trade area in Africa, what is being implemented so that we can resolve these issues of connection, which are also issues for e-commerce as a whole? Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Much, says the moderator.
Thank you very much. I will take my intervention in French because I'm from Benin. My name is José Simbo.
I'm Joseph Simbo.
The government. Okay. À suivre un peu les.
So I've been listening closely to the statements, and we see that the experiences are varied and really diversified. When we look at tech hubs, we can see that there is capacity building for young entrepreneurs. There's a possibility of having mentoring. In commercial banks, for support to new startups, there is some reticence there, because often the business model is not reassuring enough and people are not willing to take this risk. Regional development banks are based on governmental strategies, though, as I heard from Mr. Nicolas. For the UNCDF and the World Bank, they are also looking directly at these issues. But globally, you can see that one of the models of action is to have pitches to look at innovations and new models. But entrepreneurs coming to these pitches find it very difficult. For governments, we have to see how to relaunch economies. We need ideas which will develop. In Benin, we ask ourselves a question: could we put in place a fund to support entrepreneurship in the digital area? That could be a solution. We have NGOs that are putting forward this idea, trying to convince financing sources to have some support. But governments themselves need to also get involved in relaunching economic growth. It's also a development issue. So how can we go about this? Do we go to the African Development Bank or other banks with a project for a fund to support entrepreneurship? That could be a solution. That's an idea that I put to the panel. I'd like to ask them what other approaches they could suggest so that can really overcome these issues. Thank you.
Merci, Jose. So let me get a couple of questions, but they need to be questions, not long comments. Otherwise, we will not be able to, because we have another session to go into. So please.
Thank you. I think when we talk about access to finance, it's also for us as entrepreneurs to know who to talk to as a lender at which stage of development. Because some of the lenders, they will ask you to reach a certain number of customers to be accepted for funding. And to reach the number of customers required, you need money for it. It becomes like chicken and eggs. Is there anyhow there should be a platform to know which lender to talk to at which stage of development of a startup? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody from the very back? Someone who has not asked a question before? Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, hello, can you guys hear me? My name is Bram Ayu. I work for ET. ET is, I'm not here to pitch, but ET is, we offer advisory services to governments and the development partners on their programs in Kenya. My question is directed to the World Bank, Mr. Kelly, and EIB, because I noticed that the kind of clients that you are funding are actually well-established institutions like telecoms and so on and so forth. I was wondering whether you have programs to actually fund just regular startups who are actually venturing into the tech space. And then the other question that I do have is what kind of programs do you guys have in place, to ensure that you're covered from a risk perspective, to ensure that the funds that you are investing in the techpreneurs have a return on value on your end? That's my question.
Good questions. Let me now turn to our panel. So who would want to go first? Yeah, Catherine. Okay, so Catherine, also I have a question for you. I also would like to know what can EIB do more to bring non-African investors to Africa?
Okay, thank you. I think one point I'll need to clear, because of the type of institution and the nature of institution that EIB is, there is an issue of ticket size. Let's be clear on this one. So we are not able, because of our structure and the way we operate, to provide direct funding to a small entrepreneur. I think that has to be very clear. We are not the right institution for that. But the way we do to try and reach out to the small entrepreneurs is in an indirect manner, and a lot of DFIs actually, by providing funding either to commercial banks that then will be able, or at least will have the long-term resources that will enable them to reach out to small entrepreneurs. That doesn't fully cover the risk because they are taking the risk on the small entrepreneurs. So, that remains to be tackled with. But at least they cannot claim that they don't have the resources, because very often they will say we don't have long-term funding available, because this is the nature of the financial markets here. So at least, and we can also do that by providing local currency, which is another issue. The currency, the funding currency, and the forex risk that is enshrined in that. Then we can put in place on the side, as I mentioned earlier, a kind of a technical assistance, which is grant funded, whereby we will help in terms of capacity building and reaching out to both banks and entrepreneurs. So it's all indirect. And the other way is to invest in funds like TLCom Timed, who will then in turn, first of all, they have the market knowledge, as Henrietta said. I mean, they live in the market, so they are the best place to identify the deal flow and pick up those that have the real potential. So we do that in an indirect manner. So that's the first point. So I mean, so very often we have small entrepreneurs knocking on our door. Unfortunately, we cannot help them directly. We have to redirect them to either banks with whom we are working or funds. And very often when it's small entrepreneurs and innovative and startups, we will direct them to some of our impact funds that really have as an objective to provide the seed funding that these entrepreneurs will need. Thereafter, once they grow, and we are starting to have example of entrepreneurs who have been funded through some of the funds. One of them is well known here in Kenya, it's Delight. Delight was supported by one of the funds in which we are invested, and earlier this year we were able to give a corporate loans to Delight. So that is, you know, a kind of a nice way to help them indirectly first, and then they can become direct clients of ours. So I think that's what I would say in terms of how EIB can help. There is so much we can do, and one has to be realistic. I mean, and I agree with you that there is an issue of knowing where to go and where to get the money from. And then I will respond to ma sœur, because je suis née au Congo. Donc.
Oh, my sister, I'm born in Congo, so I'll answer your question in French. And I was very happy to be called Madame Catherine.
Interoperability, and I think there what I would like to point is that the government has a role to play. I mean, we did mention it on a few occasions, but the private sector alone will not be able to make it all. There is to be a policy, an enabling policy, and that's the role of the government. And that's maybe where larger institutions, and I mean EIB does not do so much policy, but I mean the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the European Union, they have a leverage there to go and speak at the highest level and try and push and leverage that policies are being put in place that will thereafter, you know, help out. I think Kenya is a good example where interoperability is coming up now. And I will stop here because I know François wants to say something on that topic, so I don't want to cover his topic. Thank you.
Before I go to François, let me turn to Tim, because there was a question to Tim directly. Tim, please.
Yeah, I think the question related to the size of loans and the kinds of customers that the World Bank can work with. Realistically, the IBRD part of the World Bank group only deals with governments, and our friends at the IFC, they won't get out of bed for an investment of less than $10 million. So we do have a difficulty in reaching out to smaller borrowers. And the way we do that is by working with intermediaries. So a good example is the work that we do at the Climate Technology Centre, which is based here at Strathmore University. That's a $15 million grant in total, of which $9 million went for setting up the centre and the staffing, etc. And then a further $6 million went to a revolving fund, which is used to invest directly in the entrepreneurs and the startups that are resident at the CTC. So by working with intermediaries and working with funds, such as those represented on this program, we are able to reach the end users, as it were. Thank you.
Thank you very much. François, very briefly, please.
I do. Je vais faire très bref.
Very brief. Concerning interoperability. Well, an important point. Mobile telephone operators who launch mobile money services, well, they are entering a new business. What is important for them is to generate volume and to demonstrate that it's profitable. And what one sees, based on the experience of certain countries, is that once it becomes profitable, one can sit all the different mobile operators around the same table, and then one can try and develop links between them, because it will lead to more transactions. It's a win-win situation, and this is exactly what happened in Tanzania, where Citigo and Airtel sat down around a table and little by little moved towards complete interoperability. And I would recommend that you should read the latest agreement between NTM and Orange, Mowali. It's mobile money, well, how does one call this? It's a mobile money switch, which was done by both companies. And at a global level, they would like to see all mobile money operators use this switch to ensure interoperability. Of course, I can give you more detail regarding this if you're interested, but turning to Benin, it was the gentleman sitting there, yes. No, the role of the government in innovation, I think, is key. We work in countries such as Malaysia, where from the point of view of innovation, things are not that developed. The government in Malaysia, for example, developed a department on the digital economy, which provides a gamut of services aimed at developing innovation in the country at a greater pace. Acceleration, investment funds, and so forth. I think that the government now has a key role to play there. And what I would propose, and we of course can have a discussion on the margins of this meeting, because we're quite active in Benin, and it would be very interesting for me to be able to share more detail with you.
Francois, there was a question on e-trade for all, so let me invite my colleague Torbjørn Fredriksen, who leads the program, to answer that question. Torbjørn, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Fernand, for bringing up the e-trade for all initiative. And I also want to come in here simply because we are about to have the UN Capital Development Fund as our 31st member of e-trade for all. I cannot really answer your question as to whether one could set up a fund or so. That's beyond my competence, but other people here are more equipped to do that. But what I think is coming out from listening to the various panelists here is that the question of financing is just part of the picture, even if you're really focusing on financing. You have the skills, you have the policy regulation, you have the connectivity, and so on and so forth, tech hubs and so on. So what I think would be perhaps worthwhile considering is that we, who are members of e-trade for all, we have UNCDF, we have the African Development Bank, we have the World Bank, and who knows, we might even have the European Investment Bank at one stage. That was an open invitation. And we have UNCTAD, and we bring different types of expertise, different types of interactions with our member states. It may be worthwhile looking at how we can work together to perhaps to address some of the issues. I know, for instance, or I don't know, I understand that the African Development Bank may be focusing a lot on the infrastructure side as such, but maybe not as much on the capacity building and technical assistance area, but others are doing that. And I think, for instance, in these recent rapid e-trade readiness assessment studies that we have undertaken now in partnership with other e-trade for all partners, we are covering a lot of the ground in this area for many LDCs in Africa. And I think also what I hear from you is that information asymmetry seems to be an issue here. Even if there are all these barriers, maybe there are still unnecessarily negative investor perceptions on investing in Africa. And here, that's why maybe, I mean, even if the EIB cannot invest directly, you have an amazing network in Europe. So maybe it's something to explore whether we can bring some of you as key stakeholders here to Europe, to maybe the e-commerce week that we're organizing in April, to have a more dedicated discussion to how to reach out to those investors that could be interested potentially in getting more involved, learning more about it, perhaps addressing some of the asymmetries that we have. Thanks.
Thank you, Torbjørn. So we are now in the concluding sessions. And in fact, we were supposed to be now talking about what the policymakers should do, but we heard what the policymakers need to do across the board. The discussion was that. The whole point of having an enabling environment, the hard infrastructure, soft infrastructure like skills, regulatory frameworks, and creating a safe space, basically, for the investors to come in, there's a big role for the governments to do. We heard from the panelists very clearly, private sector cannot do this alone. So we have these messages. So in this last session, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to summarize in about 3 minutes. What are the key takeaways from this session, and especially for your messages to governments? So let me start from this corner here. Sam?
I think our message to governments on this area of how they can best support the development of tech businesses is really to follow the advice, the themes that have been laid out today in terms of building capacity, in terms of helping both public sector, but I think in particular private sector parties to collaborate better to fill the gaps. For example, the use of data again as a way of improving the ability of financiers to finance more projects. So I think it's a combination of both sides.
Thank you. Tim?
Yeah, I guess when we think about the role of government, the phrase "can elephants dance" comes to mind. And it's clear that governments are never going to be nearly as nimble as the private sector, never nearly as nimble as the entrepreneurs that they're seeking to serve. So I think for that reason, governments probably need to focus on creating a space for entrepreneurship to develop, and both a virtual space in terms of creating the right enabling environment and the right investment conditions, but also sometimes a physical space. In the case of Ghana, where we working through the e-Transform program, the government has set aside quite a big physical space, the Accra Digital City, which is a series of old converted warehouses not so far from the airport, which has become an entrepreneurial space within the heart of the city. So yeah, creating a physical space and also creating a virtual space can help. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim.
From my perspective, I think that there's a couple of things. One, they could do is just de-risk some of this going forward. We've got data regulation coming down the line. We don't know what the rules are. That's a problem. And I think we need to take that as a regional challenge to government to actually resolve that quickly so that people know whether they're risking their money in all the right places. The second thing is we need governments as the biggest player in the economy just to adopt technology. We need them to drive the demand side and change the culture, because there's a lot of smartness that's available from local entrepreneurs and it's going unused. So I'd like to see a much bigger drive for e-government with a view to actually driving a culture of technology adoption.
Thank you. Simon, sir.
I think governments could, in addition to what's been said, the governments could support, if they really do intend to support the birth of digital entrepreneurs in down places, research and development is a place that they can do support early stage companies to explore and find market and get to a place where they actually are growing so that they can take off from there. Especially if you start talking about things like tech startups that are in the hardware space and stuff like that, they need a considerable amount of support around research and development. Then you can also look at things like allowing for policy that allows early stage investments to take place and secure it on the risk that, so that it's easy for that to happen. But also recognize that because it's risky, what's the policy around people who set up shop and then have to close shop and are moving on to the next idea. Not because they've defrauded anybody, but because they've safely realized there's no market opportunity, they need to close out. Can that be simplified so that entrepreneurs can be entrepreneurs, move on to the next thing? And that includes taxation around, can you create environments that attract, for example, people in the diaspora to come back with skills to come back into the country and benefit from a taxation that allows them to set up in the first 2-3 years and grow and scale out if possible. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Andrietta?
Just to also build on what's been said, I think on the policy side, I think so in regards to just having more tax incentives for startups, I think also something also that's specific to startups is around employee stock options. For example, many of them don't have money, so they pay their employees using stock options. But when you look at the tax laws and its impact on the employee stock options, it's not very attractive. I mean, there are instances where you may even pay taxes without receiving any cash payout. So I think we also just need to look at some of the laws around that to facilitate for a better environment for them to operate. I think also another key thing is regional integration, especially for, I mean, I guess all the different regions, because like we've said here, the markets are fairly fragmented. So you really need to be able to move to another market fairly quickly. So that would be quite helpful.
Thank you. Amolo?
At the level of the micro and small entrepreneur who's trying to participate in e-commerce world, I think governments can really facilitate access both to finance and also to the e-commerce universe if people have national IDs and business IDs that are easy to obtain. And also that the progression from being an informal to a formal enterprise is, rather than being one big step, is a set of small stages, each of which adds value both to the entrepreneur and to the government, so that people can start by being a micro informal entrepreneur, and as their business grows, they can naturally become more and more formalized until, as a larger entity, they're a fully formal institution.
Thank you very much for these very good points from the MSME point of view. Thank you. Francois?
Yes, concerning, I think, one of the role of the government is that in some countries, and I think Tanzania and Sierra Leone, I think the government has put what they call regulatory sandbox. And so what is a sandbox? It's a safe place, let's say, to innovate for entrepreneurs in an unregulated area. And I think that's something that I really would like to encourage, because I think it's really enable a lot of different companies in an unregulated area to be able to develop. It's a learning from the regulators to better regulate in the future, but also it's a free space really for innovation to be able to grow. But something I would like to warn also on this is that a lot of this sandbox, maybe there is only sand, there is not enough tools to be able to play with the sand. And so that's why I think it's important we discuss the whole day, this whole morning about, let's say, what the different tools concerning financial supports, concerning open API, concerning access to data, access to skills. So we just need to make sure that this regulatory sandbox is not only a regulatory, it's really a whole sandbox where there is a lot of tools around it that really it's a safe and really powerful place for innovators and entrepreneurs to develop.
Thank you very much. Catherine, please.
Yes, thank you. I think one point we mentioned it was the government needs to make sure that there is adequate infrastructure to enable, so they need to promote, enable investment in the infrastructure, both public or private funded, so that they have a role to play. Education and smart education is key as well. Because I think there was a very interesting case in Andela that Andreata knows probably, where an IT developer who had failed on all the exams actually made it greatly when he was trained by Andela. So that's why I say it needs to be smart education so that people get the skills that we discussed. And then another important, I've heard mentioned of tax benefits and all that. What we have observed is that sometimes investors are going into very aggressive tax jurisdictions, which can deny them access to financing at the later stage, especially from an institution like the EIB, who is following EU rules. So they need to be educated in terms of what are the best practices in terms of tax as well when they set up their company. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now let me turn to the audience. So I would like to get your feedback, not just to the government, but also to international organizations like us sitting here. UNCTAD especially, as you know, UNCTAD was created in, I don't know, in 1964, and this is the only organization in the UN created by developing countries, for developing countries. And the reason for the creation of UNCTAD was to help developing countries to integrate into the global markets. And that job is, of course, is undone, and the global in the market is increasingly becoming digital. So that if there are any feedback that you would want to give to us that we need to take back to Geneva and to Washington and New York, please. And here in the region, the agencies that are based in the region, and Cote d'Ivoire and Kenya, please, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Andrew Akelo Omogo. We run a project called, a program actually called Impact Kenya, and our still young media farm called Olives Media. Thank you for giving me the chance to give feedback on how far, one, this conference has been carried out, and two, the efforts that UNCTAD and the organizations, various organizations that are involved in this conference so far have helped young entrepreneurs, young techpreneurs get to where they are. Of course, the key issue that has been discussed here, that issue is financing. And for me, one thing that I've learned, I try to listen instead of contribute more, so that I get to understand exactly how do you get started when you have an idea and you go through this process. What I've understood is that international organizations work with local organizations that then give small funding to startups. That is a key point I've gotten out of some of the conversations that we've had. That's okay, but imagine a situation where a young entrepreneur has this idea that may actually need direct help from the international organization. I don't know how such a situation may be handled, but it's something to think about. You might, some ideas might not necessarily go through the local organizations that you already have, but you could have this idea that you directly want to present it probably before IFC or before IDA, and it could have a potential national impact than actually the lab or than the small organization that's already being funded by the international organization. So that is something that is subject, you can think about that going forward. Secondly, UNCTAD, good job. This Africa e-commerce week has been a good opportunity for various stakeholders to meet and exchange ideas and network. So this is something that should continue. We appreciate that. And going forward, I think beyond the conference, UNCTAD also needs to come up with specific programs to meet these young entrepreneurs alone, apart from such a conference. I mean, such a conference is big. You have those who have already excelled and those who are still young. So it's, the mix-up is good. But then there should be a forum specifically for the young entrepreneurs as well, to see if they can get help or give you feedback directly on their experience, on their daily experience with the tech startups. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I am Abia David from Burundi. And what I want to say is, after hearing the panel and all that you've shared, I think one key thing that we should always remember is inclusion. Inclusion is a very critical thing, and if you want to develop e-commerce and all this thing in Africa, we really have to include everyone and let everyone be part of the picture. Because I believe what makes a hand is because you have some fingers that are longer than the others and some that are short. So which means we really need to see maybe the World Bank, the Africa Development Bank, all the institutions that are represented in a panel. Let's try and see, as much as, yes, there are some big players in the digital economy that are already progressing, but let's not remember the small players that are also struggling to come up. Let's try and also try to include them and move together as the whole of Africa. I think with that, it will really help us to develop the goal that we want. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
This is Martin again from Strathmore. I just wanted to underscore some contributions from Tim Kelly. I'm really glad you underscored the Climate Innovation Center at Strathmore. As we speak, one of our colleagues is in Geneva in ITC's T4SD project that's trying to understand how value chains can enable SMEs to access global markets. You also mentioned iHub. We had a fantastic session yesterday looking at the ecosystem and startups. So just building on, I think the contributions Molo made, the one opportunity I think UNCTAD can enable not only the country, the region, and the continent, but the globe really make a difference, is on ensuring access to markets for small players. And I think an ecosystem approach is perfect. Over lunch, I'm glad Amunga is on the panel, Eugene is on the panel. Over lunch, I think 2 days ago, there were a lot of fascinating ideas we had, including the World Economic Forum, etc., that unless we had a platform like this, we'd not have been able to explore. So all the big ideas we got from global leaders, UNCTAD just, I think, keep this platform going, especially the online environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, lady here, please.
Thank you very much. I would like perhaps to recommend that UNCTAD links up with a government of several government institutions and agencies, and then so they give them the requirements of what they can fund, what they're looking for, where the gaps are, and then government goes ahead to mobilize all and maybe put together all the small innovators, including the big ones, so that together they can basically meet that need and be able to foster e-commerce in Kenya. So I think each government needs to identify its players and have them registered somewhere so that they're ready for UNCTAD or any other organization that may require or want to fund a gap or even build capacity.
Yeah, you have the last word.
Yeah, actually, thank you very much. Actually, I do have a comment based on observations this week in terms of e-commerce. I look at your image at the back whereby you have the picture of Africa, and then we have some circles and all the interconnectivity with it, whereby you're looking into actually fostering e-commerce within the Africa region. I'm coming from a technology background. Ex-IBM, ex-Accenture, worked in New York, but now I'm in Africa. And technology is the easy part. Basically, in order to actually realize the vision you have on your image, it's possible. I mean, I am able to log into Amazon.com from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm able to actually pick up a spare part of something I want. I'm able to actually pay with it via my Visa card, and via DHL, the product can actually be delivered in Nairobi within about two days. On the converse, basically, I can be able to log into an e-commerce site in Burkina Faso, Rico. I can be able to select a product, but I can't be able to do the transaction, complete the transaction. So what's happening is, from an e-commerce perspective, in terms of enabling e-commerce in the region, the problem is not with technology. I think the problem is with government regulation. The problem is with compliance. The problem is with policy. So basically, as world leaders, as part of the World Bank, as part of UNCTAD, as part of EIB, I think you have the platform to actually lobby governments in the region in order to ensure that the regulation that they have impeding e-commerce is actually removed. Because from a technology perspective, it's actually it's possible to actually have e-commerce trade within the Africa region in order to ensure that there's intra-trade across the regions of Africa. That's just my parting shot.
Thank you very much. So let me get back to our panelists if they want to have one sentence each. Or otherwise, we have like 3 minutes, we can close the session. So let me thank all of you. I think this was an extremely important topic, financing for the digital economy, and I think we heard constraints, we heard success stories, we heard conditions that needs to be in place to get startups going, and we heard about the tech hubs, the incubators, accelerators, and why they would work, why they wouldn't work. And you also heard from the banks, the platforms, the digital platforms in the region, big capital funds in the region, and Amolo brought the perspective for never to forget the small guy, the importance of inclusiveness in this space. And I think this was a very good discussion. And please also get to as my colleague Tobian mentioned, get to the eTrade for All platform. Log into it, because that's where you can really meet all of us virtually, because we have 31 with the CDF there coming on board. We have 31 international organizations on board. So you can go and see what each organization can do for your needs and get in touch with them directly, because that's what that space is for. Let me invoke something our Secretary General Mukisa Kitui said at the very beginning of this meeting. He said the whole point of us coming to Africa is not to get Alibaba and the cheap products coming elsewhere from to the region, but the whole discussion is to get African products going out to the rest of Africa and African products going out to the rest of the world. How to build the export diversification, how to create jobs, and how to make sure that Africa thrives. So that was the whole point of this exercise. Just having said that, so let me close this session, and please give a big applause to our amazing panelists. And also to the audience that brought very, very good questions. Thank you very much. This session is closed. And thank you. We will have lunch now, and we will then have the closing session at 3 o'clock. So I'll see you all there.